Everyone, at 7 o'clock, I'd like to call together the December 1st, 2022 school committee meeting. We will start by rising and joining me in the pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you very much. This evening we have a consent agenda posted, as well as our minutes from the November 17th, 2022 meeting and the oath to bills and payrolls. I'd like to accept a motion to accept posted.
Motion to accept.
Motion made by Ms. Gold,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Patel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Perfect. We'll move along to our first opportunity for interested citizens. We'll take a quick pause to see if there's anybody that wishes to speak before the school committee at this point in time. There'll be a second opportunity at the end of the meeting as well.
We have one.
We got one. Perfect.
You need to switch your name when you're here. Thank you.
Hi,
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Christina Brett. I am a teacher at Russell Street School. Thank you for the effort. A little more intimidating here in person, but I thought a real live human would make it interesting.
It's great.
In the flesh.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. Just want to, Dorothy told me I have more than 2 minutes, so I'm going to do the whole spiel. I first, just like as a teacher and like as a member of the town community, I just wanted there. Sometimes I think it's important to like thank people that are in the community that are doing a lot of things that don't always get recognized. And a couple of people that I'm sure you all know is Bill Maher. He's retiring, as you know. He's been here for 27 years, all of which I've known him, and he's had like a great impact on my experience here. And if you haven't had a smile with Bill yet, then you don't know him as well yet, because it takes a while to get there. Also, Alice Schcmte in our cafeteria is a phenomenal person. She's been there 29 years, and she really takes care of the students in the building. And I think she really did a lot for the community, and we really wanted to recognize her for all she's done. Also, Tina Averso has been a rock in the special ed department. I'm a special ed teacher, I didn't say that at the beginning. And she's really been a rock in our department through 5 directors. She's really been an excellent support system for us as special educators, because there's a lot that goes into that paperwork and organization, and she's someone that I can always count on. Also, the staff at Russell Street is amazing. A lot of us have been there for a very long time, and we're very committed to Russell Street, as well as Shaker Lane has a lot of teachers that have a lot of longevity there. I was thinking about it coming in, and it's almost been half my life that I've spent educating the students of Littleton Public Schools in the town, which I don't live in. My child is not in the school, but I was like, wow, I'm getting older. So it was very interesting. And many of the staff that have been in our both buildings and Shaker Lane also in that boat. And I really think that's something to say about the staff that is in at least those 2 buildings that I'm more familiar with. And also our building principals and office staff have been tremendous in this whole situation with the pandemic, because it has really put us through a lot, and they've really been a great support system for us. Also, the support staff for special education is, I couldn't survive without them. You know, they're there for me, they're there for the kids, and I can always count on them. And they're doing a lot of job for a little, and yeah, I really appreciate everything that they do. Sorry. I think sometimes people can be overlooked, and our life is really unpredictable what's going to happen. So I think when there's important people in your life, you should really let them know how important they are. Sorry. That was the part I was going to cut out, but I think I like
Yes,
okay. Well, I have more than 2 minutes, so okay. So some of the most frightening things in your life are obviously sometimes the most important thing, and that's like being here for me. And I think that it's really frightening, but I believe in something, and I just feel like I need to talk about it, because often as a teacher I can feel thoughts silenced out of fear, because you're nervous of what you say, and so you're quiet. And so it took a lot of courage and
to acknowledge that. So by sharing my feelings, I don't want to dismiss the needs of the town or students. It's just, I think we have to also do things that might scare you at first. So by sharing my feelings, I don't want you to think that I'm not taking into consideration for all students' needs. Caring about their well-being is something that is top priority while working with families, and is just as, if not more important than sometimes their education, making sure that they're mentally and supported. So if any of my past families disagree, I'm open to any comments about it, because I welcome constructive support so I can also learn from. I've read as much as I can of all the articles that were shared. I appreciate, Banal, the communication we had when I needed some clarification. I thought that was really good that you had communicated with teachers for questions that I had. And I've watched as many of the meetings as I can online, but I'm human with a family and I can't always be here. So my main discussion for tonight is to talk about the time change. I know that the committees have put in a ton of work, and thank you for doing that. When the letter went out from Cheryl, I volunteered, and it's something that I wish I had done, but in June, it's one day at a time and you're getting through the year. I'm strongly against the time change, and there are a few reasons why. I play two roles, one as a teacher, but also as a human, because I'm always putting the students above myself, but sometimes you need to be an advocate for yourself, your family, and also your career. So just to talk about being, sometimes I think teachers can be almost like a robot, you know, like you go in, you do your job, you do all these things, but also we're humans too. We have families. I'm a mother, a wife, a daughter. There's things that childcare, it would definitely affect my family. We're working multiple jobs just to get through things, and you know, the after school care, which I know was brought up at the last meeting, is also a concern to some families, but also staffing also has some families to support. Also, I feel very stretched and overwhelmed. Cheryl had sent this nice video clip about Brene Brown, and she talks about being stressed and overwhelmed. The stress is something that you can manage pretty much every day. It's like you're in the weeds, you're getting through it. But when you're overwhelmed at a very high level of stress, then it can actually lead you to function, to shut down, and you can't function when you're overwhelmed. Because our language shapes what we're experiencing, we go through the all day. So if you're saying I'm overwhelmed, then your body, you're just shutting down and you can't do. I feel like at this point as a teacher, we're shutting down. There's a lot going on. And I'm going to connect that to how it is being a teacher in this. And I know some of you have some academic background, so you are familiar with that. Everything that I do as a special educator is done with a team. We don't make decisions without them, so I appreciate you forming a team to kind of come up with some solutions to the time change. And this is where I'm, you know, kicking myself for not volunteering. Probably for my own mental health, I didn't do it because it's a lot. And I think it's important that every building had a say. I'm not exactly sure who was on the, I was trying to look, it just was like two teachers, principals, so it was hard to like tell. But I think a lot of things that are happening within a building aren't always like known by the general public. Because there have been a lot of new initiatives, which I'll talk about. I'm not denying Russell Street has a sweet spot, you know, it's got a great time. I think it's a great time for all kids, you know, to have the opportunity to be in that time frame. So by taking of the choices, you know, by taking Russell Street out, it's like helping 3, losing 1, like we're going to the end spot of the the slot of times, if you want to say. Russell Street's schedule works well. It works really well. The schedule is designed to have core academics in the morning. I was part of the scheduling committee that took multiple times to kind of get a schedule that allowed students to have access to their core academics in the morning. So you could have more, for most classes, there are some classes that have academics just because of rotation with classrooms and sharing with fifth grades doing their rotations and things like that. But it's designed so that kids are at their best in the morning. With either of the shifts, it would put a lot of academics in the afternoon. So same as Shaker Lane was saying, also they are not as engaged in the afternoon at that age as well. Also, students with disabilities stamina is lower than the typical student. And for those students, it's really important that you get them at their best. They receive access to the general curriculum, which is what we want them all to have, but they also have their support systems within. And by pushing everything for Russell Street, at least, you're gonna, their stamina to either receive the direct instruction through their IEP or the tier, the classroom teacher, it's gonna be a lot for them. And I can understand why Shaker Lane was having a challenge. So I'm not dismissing their time. I think that their time is very difficult, and anyone would really benefit from an earlier time, especially Shaker Lane. And our schedule is extremely impacted by having shared UA staff. So we're very limited. When we did the scheduling committee, it was very hard to make sure that PE and art and music were on rotation, and not having unified arts in each school is really not benefiting anyone. It was really, really difficult. We sat for hours and hours trying to work it out. So that really pushes us to have academics in certain times. And with our schedule, which really works, is in that afternoon is when kids can have a lot of hands-on stuff. Where the younger kids go into specials in the afternoon, is developmentally, that's what's right for them. And when we did the planning committee, that's how we tried to set up the classroom, the schedules for the younger kids. Okay. And then I'm super passionate about my job. If anyone has ever talked to me, I love it. I just love it, and I hope that message is always delivered to any of the families that I've worked with. But that passion can be diminished when there's so much change. And I think looking from the outside, it might seem like, oh, it's a time change. It's a time change. They can do that and they can build with that. But there have been lots of changes that have happened internally that I'm not sure that, I don't think you get many teachers here. There's not always that open communication with actual human staff between instead of emails or things like that, outside of union things. But in the past 3 years, and Beth's not here, but she could help me with this too. But in the past 3 years, Shaker Lane and Russell Street have had 3 new curriculums. So that's a lot. Even as a veteran teacher, and most teachers in my building are veteran teachers, it's like pulling the carpet out from you a year after year after year. And we all know it takes about 7-ish years to get it together. And when you're constantly having change across all academic core areas, it's a lot. So that's one thing I'm not sure if you have known about. 3rd grade has the foundation, so that would be the 3rd, all 4th, and 5th don't have that. Also, 2 of those curriculums do not have meaningful differentiation to allow access to special education students all the time, as same as the diverse learners. I've never taught the best deal as much as I have in the past 3 years because I'm constantly chewing her, looking for ideas of how to help my students. I've had multiple meetings with, each of the contact people for the programs Susan Mitchell and I have like really worked closely together for the home ec program. So that is something that is it's what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna do it for the kid, no matter what, but it's another thing that is, a lot of change for staff. So there's been the new curriculum demands, change of our schedules in our school, even the calendar change has affected us and our specials. So that's been huge. And a lot of that is happening on the inside. And I'm not sure if anyone even knew that. So like just thinking about change after change after change. Is change inevitable? Yes. Do we need new curriculums? Yes. But when you're doing it year after year after year, and probably next year or the year after we'll be reading and anticipating, it's a lot. It's a lot. So I feel like I prefer no change. That is just how I'm feeling about that, no change, but I don't feel like any of the options are equitable for Russell Street. If we are any of the other ones besides change, it's an hour and 5 minutes different for us, which is a lot, or 45 minutes, which is a lot. At the end of your last meeting, there was option 6 and I kept listening to it, and then it wasn't in the picture and I needed visual, things like that. But that seemed to be the only option. If Russell Street and Shaker Lane were at the same time, then it would be equitable. Everyone having 25 minutes, I believe. And I think Steve Mark said the buses, plug his ears. Steve Marks, if you're listening, but like just more buses would be very helpful. And if I'm incorrect on any of that information, it was a lot. So I was trying to absorb it all, but it just doesn't seem equitable. It seems like good for 3, not for 1, because obviously Shaker Lane had a problem with the schedule, and then you're just being swapped over. And we wouldn't want them to have it, and I would think that they wouldn't want us, you wouldn't want someone else's, dirty laundry or whatever you want to say. So I think that I'm not sure what's going to happen. But I just wanted to give my opinion, and I think I can't remember why that option may not have worked, but it seems like they could run at a different time or something. You can know information about that, but I think at least that would be equitable, because I don't feel like the 2 options are. So I'm pro no change, but that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's always nice to hear from the staff.
Yes.
All right. See if there's anybody else. Okay. Well, Lynn was going to speak for a second. All right. Thanks. All right. At this point of the meeting, we'll advance our recognition portion. So John Feltus will give us an update, please. Student representative.
Awesome. Hello, my name is John Feltus. I am the student representative for Littleton Schools, and I have some updates to give. The Shaker Lane held their November community meeting yesterday. They talked about ways that they can show heart and light up the season. They will be decorating light bulbs to display in the main lobby to show art this holiday season. The Russell Street delivered 350 pounds of donated food items to Loaves and Fishes after their November food drive. Students and staff enjoyed a turkey trot that led onto the track to lead into the Thanksgiving break. They look forward to fun activities and festivities that will take place that'll take them into the holiday break in December. At the middle school, the students will host the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And at the high school, the winter concert is December 6th at 7 o'clock in the auditorium.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Clement?
Sure. Excuse me. The only thing I was going to add to that is, this time of year is so exciting. We have concerts, and plays, and many other things going on in our schools. And just like to encourage our public to support our events as much as possible. The high school play was as always very well done. It's a pleasure to attend. The middle school play, Willy Wonka, is at the high school, and they always do a good job. It's always a great night of entertainment. And our students work so hard to put on these performances. So I just wanted to give credit to our students for participating in these events, and obviously the staff that are involved in making them happen. So our concerts will be announced soon as well, and they're a great evening of entertainment. So I know it's a busy time of year for everybody, but if you can somehow schedule them into your calendars, you won't be disappointed.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. All right, at this point, we'll move on to our presentation portion of the evening. So we've got two somewhat heavy presentations this evening. The first is going to be a special ed program review, followed by survey results, school start time survey. Number two, we're scheduled for 30 minutes and 40 minutes, just so that the community is aware. I think after each presentation, there'll obviously be some school committee discussion, and I think it possibly might be appropriate to hear from the community on each presentation as well, so that members of the community aren't waiting an additional 40, 45 minutes, an hour, and we kind of eventually forget what we heard. So we'll start first with the special education program review. I'll read it as it's listed. Consultant for the special education program review will be discussing findings. Scheduled for about 30 minutes or so, which likely includes some discussion, and then we'll open it up for public input, and we'll move on to the second presentation. So take it away. The presentation should be going up.
It should be.
Ask and you shall receive.
You're in good hands with Dorothy.
Don't say that, yeah.
Well, thanks very much for having us tonight, and want to introduce us.
Yeah, I guess we should introduce ourselves first.
Sure.
Age before beauty, or how are we doing this? I'm Sally Smith. I've been in the field of education for over 40 years. I hate to say it, that's been that many years. You know, from the time I was little, I had a real passion about education. My mother was a first grade teacher. I was always going to her classroom, and she really stressed the importance of education. It was always interesting though, when I had days off and I went over to her classroom, hence getting into special ed. I was always interested in the kids that were having a hard time doing something, you know, whether it was behaviorally or academics, and I would kind of gravitate toward those kids. Went into special education. I've had a variety of positions. True believer in the public school system. I worked for a number of years in the Linfield Public Schools, and most recently in the Belmont Public Schools. I've been an inclusion specialist and early childhood coordinator. My last position, I was the director of student services. I have a passion in working with program development and inclusion. I really believe, and we really need to look at the least restrictive environment and what do students need, what kinds of supports to remain in their communities. That's not to say sometimes there's not a student that might need for a short time something that we don't have in the community, but for the majority of kids to be in their community with their peers, it makes a lot of sense. And I try to stay current in special education. I actually have a daughter that works in public policy in DC, and she's heard Patrick and me on certain Zoom conversations and said, you really shouldn't be saying it that way. The new language is this. So I mean, it's actually good to have Cindy around. The other thing I do is I coordinate and run a group for early childhood coordinators and another one for team chairs and out of district coordinators. So that gives you a sample.
Very good.
My name is Patrick Barbieri. I just retired last year as executive director of Lab Collaborative. I was there for 32 years. Had every position from para to teacher to administrator, then executive director. Also had a sister who went through the program as well. So my upbringing of special education, similar to Sally, with all of Lab's programs were in the public schools. We truly believe in that, least restrictive. These kind of consultations and evaluations that we do, we kind of did naturally just being in the public schools. So they were just so important to kind of how the districts learn, how we learn from the districts. And again, looking at how students are included is just very much our passion when we're doing these evaluations. So we will talk about that quite a bit. So let's get into the first slide. So Sally and I do lots of evaluations and districts asked us to come in for different reasons. This one, we were asked to look at the operational practices of the support related service providers. Maybe district, it's different. We listed all the ones that we actually met with and interviewed. And we're also asked to look at the structure of the team chairs and we asked district liaison as well. Again, we've been asked to do these many times. So one of the things that we kind of look at and go into other districts, not that, you know, what's good for Littleton is good for another district or vice versa. It's just to kind of have perspective to how we bring our evaluation and our results to the audience.
And one of the other things I want to say, it was really nice to come to Littleton as we did interviewing and looked at records. And I have to say, all of the staff that were interviewed with related service providers went above and beyond. Even though we met and interviewed, and it was like maybe 45 minutes, you know, they would actually, we told them, if you have something else driving home, you need to tell us, call us, we'll have a conversation, send an email, and they really did that. And they were really involved in coming up with some of the solutions to things they were struggling with. So that's a big plus. We don't always get that in districts. People say, uh-oh, they're evaluating me, I don't want to go there, I don't want change. But they were really open to hearing how different districts and other possibilities.
And we make it very clear, it's not about them. We're trying to get, you know, for many people, we're trying to get themes about what's going on in the district. So staff can be nervous, we try to make them feel comfortable, try to make sure we get the most out of them as we can. And I gotta say that I think most of the staff that we met with just felt comfortable and kind of really brought good ideas to the table as well. So in our report, we're gonna be going over the recommendations. But in the report, we wrote some of the accommodations. There's a lot going on in Littleton that's really good. But our job is to come in and show, you know, the things that, you know, hopefully we can help improve some of the stuff that's going on. So in the methodology, as I said, we bring perspective. When I was in the collaborative, I worked with over 70 districts, along with the 5 member districts. Sally as well has done a number of these with many, many districts. So we learn, we see new things that people are doing, best practices. And we try to step back at the 5,000 foot level and say, okay, what's going to work in Littleton? How can we bring some of what we've learned from the other districts? We get that asked that all the time. What are they doing in this district? So bringing perspective is important.
Yeah, even in terms of our recommendations, and I'm sure if you've looked at the full report, we don't necessarily say there's one way to do it. We'll give suggestions, but we know every district is different. So you get your stakeholders and people together to discuss. And we may give you 10 recommendations on a report, and you may say, you know, for us, and we have to look at budgets and space and all of that. You know, we really like 5 of these, and we're going to go forward on this one, you know, in the next couple of years, and go from there. So it's like any outside report.
So as Sally said, most of our time we spent interviewing staff. And you know, we try to take our time with this and sometimes staff will reach out to us and they'll want to meet again. They'll send us an email. We always put it out there because again, they're nervous and sometimes it comes out as, you know, they're going home, like she said. And they say, can we talk again? Absolutely. So we try to spend as much time because that's really where you get the information from. We met both as groups and as individuals as well. With the support related staff, we looked at the schedules. Again, we're not, you know, just making these judgments right away. We're just kind of looking at how everybody's scheduled, kind of the time that's allotted for how much time these students, kind of how they're working in groups. Again, that's another major part of it because they can be inconsistent, and our job is to try to bring it, and you know, hopefully we can work towards making it as productive as possible. The whole time we're looking at how these related services are aligning with the specialized programs. You know, how are they delivering the services within the classrooms? Next slide.
Okay, so in order to move forward, we really felt strongly that we needed to redefine and have a position, a student services liaison, somebody that could report to Lynn, the Director of Student Services, but oversee the related service providers, being able to look at caseload versus workload. It's not to say that like all the speech and language pathologists across the district weren't working well together, but I think if you have a central person that can really say, okay, this is the level of need of this student, and that's the piece, even looking back at my job when I was director of student services in Belmont, you know, I think I've come a long way even since then, that I would look at, oh, the speech and language pathologist only has 25 kids. That's like nothing, you know, and then, okay, it's got to be 30. But we really need to look at the workload. There are some kids that we're going to keep in the community that need to be seen more often. You need to be in the classroom. You need to work with parents. You have augmentative communication devices. So we really kind of need to weight the student in terms of the needs, whether it's communication, OT, PT, any of the related services.
And if you look at the Director of Student Services and all of the new things that Desi has us do, and you just kind of write them out and what Lynn has to do, it just becomes overwhelming. You just become locked, and we've seen it so many times. And what happens is that person doesn't become as visible in the community, in the schools. That needs to happen. And sometimes, and that's why I think these evaluations are good, because we can bring it to life. And we can say, you know, are you able to get to the schools, and or you just keeping afloat, you know, and well, Desi has another thing that they threw at us. So it just, and I've been in here when I've seen everything being added on to these jobs, and they're very difficult. When we looked at it, we looked at the positions of the team chairs and the out of district liaison, the director of student services. The best option would be to try to, you know, move a little way some of those jobs to the student service liaison as well. They can do those jobs, so the director of student services could be more visible. Otherwise, it'll go years and it'll just keep on piling on, and you just become in your office and you're just trying to get the work done. And that's, you know, you have to do it because your DESE requires that you get this information. And so that was one of the reasons why we saw it as well. As far as the support related services, and Sally briefly mentioned this, when we look at the schedules, and we met with them as a group and we met with many of them individually, that having somebody oversee them and meeting regular, you're solving problems as you go. You're creating the best practices. You're looking at case loads, which we'll talk about in a little while. We felt that the position, and we put it in the report, student service liaison, that's one of the things that they would do. They would meet with the support related services regularly, kind of, you know, ask them questions about what's going on, how you doing, rather than things building up and everything being on the table as one. So that's another thing that this person would do. Also the special programs as well.
Right, to oversee the specialist programs.
Yeah, so, you know, as Littleton starts to build their own programs, and hopefully you can do that, and it sounds like you have a good start. You want really good oversight on that all the time. You want to know who's doing it, because when we ask questions, we'll say, so who oversees this person? Who oversees this program? Sometimes you get these blank looks. And by default, people make it work and they make it happen. But when change is needed, or you need to make a decision, or you need to make a change, or you're getting different cohorts of students, you need somebody seeing that before it comes so you can prepare. Most, you see people are just reacting to these things and trying to make changes. You know how that goes. It just gets people irritated, and you know, you want to do it the next year. You have somebody overseeing this, you kind of get it real quick.
And we've been in other districts similar to Littleton, where that's been one of our recommendations, to have program oversight. Because otherwise you got 2 or 3 people doing this and nobody knows what's going on.
Okay, next slide. This is in the report. It just shows what we would look at as the hierarchy. Team chairpersons would report to the student service liaison. Service liaison reports the director of student service. This also, I could say one more thing. Yeah, being in administration and dealing with issues, it just can't go to one person all the time. It has to kind of sometimes go with the person who oversees you, goes through those levels. It's just a nice way for staff to be able to know, this is who I go to. If it's not working out, I possibly could go to the next level. So it's not a huge change, but it is a little bit of a change.
Do you prefer us to hold our questions to the end, or
Whatever you want.
Mr. Chairman?
Right, go right ahead.
No, it's just so
Yeah.
you make staffing recommendations, and one of them is to create this new student service liaison, but the other is to redefine the role or drop the actual position of out of district coordinator. Is that correct?
So that person, is doing out of district. They would continue to do it. So it's not adding on a position.
That's my question. It's not adding,
No.
it's not adding.
Redefining.
Redefine, yeah.
It's restructuring the position.
That's what I understood. I just want to make sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good question.
Okay, so we met with the team chairpersons, and one of the things that, we recognized right away that they were in the same unit, as, you know, the teachers and the people that when they would go to a team meeting, they're running the team meeting. They're overseeing it, they're facilitating it. And in some cases that can work, but ultimately when decisions have to be made, somebody at the table needs to make the decision. They have to have the ability to make that decision. And we really felt that the team chairpersons need to be seen as administrators. So that means that they would be, you know, have their own contracts, so they had an administrative role. However, the decisions got, you know, worked out to what decisions and they could make at the meetings. You know, that would be part of the team, but we know they go a ton of meetings over and over, and that's one of the things we saw too, like one meeting after another, then they have to go back before they can make a decision. Maybe they can't make 100% of decisions, if you kind of want to come back to your team to look at that anyways, but they have to have more decision-making ability at the meeting, so.
So can I ask, I'm sorry, the clarifying question there. So is the ability to have that authority or not to have that authority tied to their status as being part of the teacher unit or being an administrator? Is that correct?
Our terminology is being seen as an administrator.
Okay.
So if a teacher's in a meeting or support-related service provider, and they see their own peer, their own unit person.
The perception and pay grade.
There was more pushback,
Yeah.
like, hey, you can't tell me that because, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, peers, right.
Exactly.
You're just carrying the hat this year and it might be me.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's authority and responsibility then though. So if you're saying this part, okay.
It would, because you would be making some decisions at the team meeting, well, they should be made, rather than say, oh, we're gonna have another team meeting and, you know.
It's not even really legal to go back. You shouldn't have to go back and say, well, I gotta go ask Lynn or whatever. That the team chairperson should have the authority to go in. And if the team decides this is what the student needs, this is what the student needs.
So make the decision at the table with the parents there and all that.
This recommendation is almost a promotion within the organization for those individuals, or formalizes a bit of a promotion, because
Yeah.
they'd be removed from that class. and-
Yeah.
Can I wait,
Yeah.
please,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's how it's operating now, and it's when the team chairs are at a table in a team meeting and they're committing funds, district funds on a daily basis. That is an administrative function. And it is how we are operating, because I would never have the team chairs not do that. I would never have them say, we can't make this decision as a team. We need to check Lynn, because to me, I'm more concerned with following the team process versus that. But I mean, functionally, really, they are committing district funds on a daily basis.
And the
Thank
law,
Not thank you.
good question.
Yeah.
We also saw the work that they do, and they're busy. Like I said, we're going to meet, they're doing the IEPs, whatever needs to be done, working with parents and advocates, the whole deal, that they should have some type of administrative support. And we see this in a lot of districts. And what that means, we didn't want to define that specifically, but the time that they are spent printing IEPs or doing the things
The
that,
paperwork.
yeah, I mean, that's stuff that
It's
really.
clerical
comes out.
stuff.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be spending their time. They should be working with families and.
We're not saying it's 100% person, but something to get them away from doing that. Just spending more time with the teams can be better quality. Okay, next slide. So we
Could see it from-
in all of our evaluations that we do with support related, this comes up all the time. This is one that we really look at. And just like students being the least restrictive placements, similar to support related services time and where they do their services. And we hear it push in, pull out type of, integrated, all different terms. Well, we can't use that term.
No, we can't, no.
So, one thing is to really define, what the practice is in the district, and we'll ask that, you talk about, and typically it's the person that decides what they're gonna do. Maybe it's their background, what they've done in the district that they've worked at. But we really think it's important to define the practice in the district, how much push in and pull out are we actually gonna do? And that can look really different from elementary to middle to high school and to transition age. To have discussion about that and have some type of practice is really good. And that's general education. It's in the specialized programs as well. We listed in the report, there's so many benefits of doing this in the classroom. It maximizes the time that.
It's the benefit for general ed and special ed. You think about the time it takes to whatever age the kid is to get out of the classroom, go down to the office, come back and all of that. And then you need even more time for the teams to meet to discuss what happened during the therapy session. Whereas if the teacher's right in the classroom, they can observe, they can carry over on a daily basis. Huge difference. And kids feel more comfortable. And if you're good at it as a special educator coming in or the related service provider, they get to know all the kids. So especially when the kids get older, they don't want to be seen like, oh, there's a special ed person coming in.
And we put, again, in the report, we use terms like co-treat, groups, dyads, and really what that means is that could be two support-related services working together with a student or a group of students. And you see this being done quite a lot in the districts. It's just really, really good practice. So we didn't do a deep dive into it, but we just suggest that there's discussion about what that would look like.
Can I ask a clarifying question there? So because it was highlighted as a recommendation, you probably observed something where, I don't want to say we're falling short, but there might be room for improvement. I mean, you've done a lot of these evaluations as compared to other peer-like districts. How much room for improvement would there be in this particular area?
So what I got from the interviews, and there's always a question for every single specialist that we, that there was a willingness and a want to do that. And that to me is because sometimes, it becomes their domain and they want to do it the way they want to do it, which is fine. But ultimately, when we bring it up and we kind of say, do you do it now? Do you currently, we do a little bit, me and the OT may do a little bit of work together. So what we got from it, similar to other districts, was that people did it on their own volition. It wasn't really when they came in, this was the practice they do in the district. It probably happens in most of the districts.
It would also be like we have a new hire. It would be good if you're hiring a new speech and language person or whatever, that, we do inclusive therapies and being in the classroom rather than, and it does depend where they've come from, but seeing more and more districts really looking to have therapies within the classroom. That also means, though, there needs to be, we don't want therapy to look like, oh yeah, speech and language or PT are coming in, but they're over in the corner. They may as well be down the hall if they're in their office. They need to be part of the whole classroom and use classroom materials as much as possible. So kids aren't doing different things in the therapy.
There are some districts that, again, at the different levels, it should be different. So for high school students in elementary, it should look different and pull out versus, but perhaps maybe at the middle of high school, that's what you look at first. How do we integrate in the classroom first? How do we do the services in the classroom? Then look at pull out second. What we tend to see most times is the opposite. So just move it, even if it's increased, 25%, 30%, that's going to be pretty significant.
Okay, that's helpful. But just to clarify, you didn't actually interview any like special education sort of general ed teachers or reading specialists or math specialists. This is OT, PT, speech therapist. Okay.
Exactly. Those are the ones that are.
Would you typically have interviewed those staff members or made them part of the process?
If it was a program eval, if it was
Okay.
doing
Yeah.
the specific programs, we would.
All right.
And again, we've done these evals where we're just looking at the support related service
Okay.
providers. That's pretty typical of evaluations
All right.
that they're asked.
Did you have a question?
I just, just to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, understanding. It sounds like I'm thinking of the DESI forms. We may need to have a conversation about can we clearly articulate what our philosophy is as a district? And to think about, again, the DESI forms, like the scope and consistency. Like we could hit it at this level, we've proven we can be proficient. I hope we have, but that we're doing it more often and more in circumstances. Does that seem fair?
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't look at it and say, well, there's a problem.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It was just, what could make it a little bit better? How could people look at it differently? Maybe it's important they haven't heard of it. I mean, they know about the push and pull, but maybe how a model like that works.
Can I get, maybe I give a kind of a concrete example that I feel like is helpful. So like our occupational therapists are amazing. And so they will use like a handwriting program for a student that has fine motor challenges. So they might be using like handwriting without tears. But in our general ed classrooms, the curriculum we're using is Foundations. Foundations has a handwriting component to it. The handwriting without tears and Foundations teach formulation of letters in a very different way. So if you have a child that's being pulled out for OT, learning how to form their letters using handwriting without tears, and then is going in class for ELA and they're learning how to form those letters, and they're not using the skyline, and it can make it extraordinarily confusing when this, philosophically having the OT deliver their OT services during a Foundations time, they're working on that fine motor writing skills. And there's also the general ed teachers are seeing the strategies that they're using, because I can guarantee there's probably 2 or 3 kids that may not have a disability related need, but might have some struggles with forming letters. So there's a lot of different opportunities to do that.
That's really helpful. And my guess is that anticipates your recommendations about professional development and having people work together. So thanks, Lynn.
Yeah, and it's not as if we're not doing this. What we're looking to do is continue to transform the practice. So some of our staff have been trained for pull-out for those services, and they're beginning to realize it. The only reason they're beginning to realize it is we've been having those conversations for the last 2 years. And says, look, we need to be more inclusive. So it's comforting to me that came out in your interviews, because 3 years ago that wouldn't have come out in your interviews. So it's a matter of continuing to move forward and with as much inclusion as possible.
It's interesting you say about inclusion, because we're in another district where we're saying in the early 2000s, we just got program happy, and we need a program for this, and we need a program for that. And now it's really shifting, and it's shifting for the better, that we're looking at inclusion. And our first, when we're having the IEP meeting and we're doing the assessments, when I see that page about they're taking a kid out and they say, oh, because he needs this, that, and that. I want to make sure they absolutely need to be out of that classroom to meet the goals and objectives on that ed goal. And I think we're focusing more on that now than we did before. And I know having built programs in Belmont when I was director, it was interesting. We did need a program for social emotional, and we built one at the elementary, middle, and high school level. And of course, the elementary one was in one elementary building, and then they came from other schools. And sure enough, kids that the teachers in that building could handle before through guidance and counseling and the psychologist all of a sudden, oh, no, they need to go down to the bridge program. So like build it, they will come. So
true.
And just in the administrative structure where we had define a position, they would be meeting with the support related service providers and discussing this on a regular basis. So you're coming together, and that offers a time for them to be able to talk about, what kind of things do we want to work on? Perhaps the pull-up versus push in is one of those topics.
I think having the new position or a change position, redefining the position for the liaison overseeing the specialists, that'll be a topic as you're meeting with speech and language people or the OT, the whole inclusion piece of what we're doing. And someone might say, I'm doing it this way. And the other says, oh, that's a really good idea. I haven't tried that. So I think that's going to help move things forward.
All right, developing consistent IEP training at all levels. So there's could be a new IEP coming out. If the city comes through with it. We were just talking about that a little while ago. We've been waiting for a long time. When we go to a district and we talk about IEPs and how IEPs are written, There's one thing, and we ask about the training of IEPs. So it was pretty clear to us as we were talking about the IEPs and how they were being done, that this needed to be a focus. We will recommend certain types of training or people that do it, but that's not what's important. It's more important that it becomes a priority for staff to do this. And if a new IEP comes along and maybe it's a good time to do this, because writing good quality IEPs is extremely important. Writing it not as individuals, but as groups, looking at skill levels and looking at it again, another, as you said, philosophy or practice in the district. How do we write those IEPs? But the information we were getting that the IEP training was optional. We felt that it would be important through the professional development to make it mandatory and say, this is the approach that we're going to take to writing IEPs. It just kind of comes up the levels, and it makes it easier from each level when a student transitions to take that IEP and really understand how it's written. We could talk about all the ways that you can do that and how good IEPs are written, but when we go to the districts and we make those recommendations, and because we're seeing that lack of a team writing it together, writing it on one skill level, not just as individuals. So,
And all of a sudden you have a fragmented student, it's like, here's the communication goals. And number one, only a speech and language person is going to work on that and be responsible. No, that should be happening with the teacher and everybody all day long, even the motors, any of the skills. So everybody should own all of the, really all of the goals.
so whatever is decided about who would do the IEP training or how, it just shouldn't be optional. It should be something that everybody partakes in throughout, a few years of professional development. All right, next slide. All right.
We talked a little bit about this, caseload versus workload. And I think this is a change for not just Littleton, but a number of districts. And part of that is we are keeping and should be more complex kids within the district. For example, for speech and language, I'll just take that as an example. If a child just has some articulation difficulty, that's pretty simple. A couple times it might clear up in a year or whatever. It can be developmental. But if someone has more intense, nonverbal, other needs, they're going to require more time with the speech and language pathologist, with the child, with the parents, training them for home stuff. I think what we need is like a weighted system. Here's Johnny. This is Johnny's needs. So he might count as 4 students, whereas someone else might count as 1.
Can I give an example for that too? So we have a number of students that are coming into the district, and students that are nonverbal or are not yet verbal communicators that are using iPads to communicate. They're using devices to communicate, and with that comes a lot of programming.
Yeah.
Programming for the device, training of the staff to be able to use the device, updating the programming. So as the student makes progress, we need to add more vocabulary. We need to add more layers and screens because they're dynamic devices. And so they need to be updated. So there's a lot of time that happens outside of that 2 times 30 speech therapy session for consultation and for training.
And a lot of support related services will ask, they'll bring that topic up about workload versus caseload. And I think most people understand it. When we look at schedules, we're not there to make changes in the schedules. Again, our recommendation is to have somebody oversee them and meet with them regularly so they can look at their schedules all the time, just to have some equity. About, geez, I know I have 20 students, but my caseload is just unjammed, or another person may just have the same amount, but they have more time. So they just need to work together a little bit on that and just evaluate it. But those terms are just used quite a bit. And they're certainly understood, but how those changes are made and how they're made equitable can now be done with this new structure. Okay, next slide. So this is again another common thing that we see in districts with support related services, depending on who they report to, what school that they're in, and we'll ask, do you get professional development? What have you got? How does it help you to get better at your job? Or is there a particular initiative in the district that you're getting professional development that's helping whatever the speech department get better? And most times we hear, if they're doing it in the building, there isn't a lot for them to access. They can be part of the building, which is great, with their colleagues. But as Littleton starts to develop more programs and you start to build, you're going to want specific expertise in areas where speech, they go to their workshops and their organization, OT goes to theirs. There's a lot of great practices out there, and they get really excited about these things and want to bring them back to the district. So just looking at that professional development, however that's offered, or if whoever's part of making those decisions, that we just make sure that there's something there that they're able to get done.
And also that's something you use train the trainer model, where you send one particular occupational therapist, a couple, and then come back and train other occupational therapists in the district. And then they go further and train teachers and from there.
A lot of the people I've met have some great ideas. They were coming up with stuff that they were eager to share the things that they've learned in their background. If they could only share it with everybody else, or like Sally said, train other people, that would be great. We didn't do a deep dive into this, but I have a lot of experience with assistive technology and the director of technologies. I did a lot of groups when I was at the collaborative, and when everything was changing and the big, apps came on and, became overwhelming to people. We hired the assistive tech teams and director of technology teams with me. One of the things that we tried to do is get the communication among everybody really tight. And the reason is because there had to be a purpose of what was going to be used in the district. You can't just throw 100 apps at people and say, we're not using this. Then, volume purchasing came, they were able to get it out to the schools. Just that there's a system that assistive techs play really important positions, and they have a lot of great knowledge that they're working with the director of technology, and they're talking rather than just people working independently. Just finding it, again, when I was talking to people, some of the stuff that I heard them doing and that they were using was wonderful. And I would say, so how does it get done in this school? And it was different from this school. Or the person comes in and tells us to do this. Just a little bit of communication. And these two people really kind of are at the center. So just that they have an understanding of, if I'm going to do this, I just report to this person, I talk to them, I communicate to them. So that's come a long way over the years. I've seen just a lot of changes with a lot of frustration, a lot of confusion. And but I think as people have got systems in the districts, it's worked a lot better. Ultimately for the students, and that's what we want to go. All right, so we as we were talking, we heard a lot about the programs and a lot about what could be, which was great. I think that's the way the district could go. There were prior evaluations that were done, and we always asked, what was implemented, what wasn't implemented, how did it go? And ultimately, I think you asked the question, if talking to the teachers and the paraprofessional, the people in the building, ultimately that should be done as well, because now you're kind of bringing these two together. You're kind of seeing how the practice of the program, the specialized program is run. How do you build programs and why? Again, that's something that we tend to do when we go in there, then we can kind of marry both together. So the district should look at that down the future, maybe as you're starting to build those programs, stay ahead of the game. I think doing evaluations is a good thing. It's a healthy thing. They're required to do them. So staying ahead of it just makes the programs better and staying on top of it.
Actually, interesting. I can't remember how many years ago. It was when the previous director of student services was here. I did do a program eval with the early childhood program. I don't really know because I haven't seen it recently, what's been put in place. And things have changed too from when I did it. So.
That was it. That's our last slide.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the presentation. This point in time, why don't we hear from school committee members if they have any questions or feedback or comments? Gail? You don't have to.
I have any question.
Good.
This was really straightforward. I really appreciate the concise evaluations, really sounds like you did an amazing thorough job.
Oh, no, there is.
Brad. I have a couple. No, I agree. I thought it was a really clearly written report and I really appreciate that. I especially appreciate the accommodation section because I think that speaks to, you pointed out some things we need to work on, but the idea that people are in it and willing to work and have this kind of team approach, I think gives us the opportunity to have the conversations we want us to have. You identify or kind of tell the committee and I guess the community that we should think about these recommendations in terms of some things you can do immediately and some things you may take a 2 to 3 year period. I've got my own list of things that seem to be doable immediately. Some cost money, some don't. I wonder if you feel comfortable giving us kind of priority wise, what would you say are things that demand immediate attention and what are things are more longitudinal
Yeah.
that we should be thinking about?
So again, nothing was immediate in the sense of urgency. You know, so if something was really kind of bad, we would come, we didn't see that. We looked at it more in the perspective like, okay, there's some really good things going on here. Here's where maybe communication can be enhanced to be able to make those things happen. So that structure, the administrative structure, I think is important because it does bridge more communication among the support related service providers. And they're such an important part of what's being done in the classroom. And certainly having, you know, the director being able to go around and be visible to check on things and, you know, have that ability just to sit down and say, hey, you know, let's talk about this. Rather than just putting out fires, which we know is going to be part of the job anyways, but to minimize that is really important.
Because what often comes up when we go into do program evaluations and we get in the classrooms and we interview the teachers and all of that, they'll say, what would you like to see? If you were writing this report, what are the top 3 recommendations or whatever? One of the things frequently comes up is, well, they're telling us to do this, that, and the other thing, but the director's never over here. You know, they don't know what I'm doing in my classroom. And really appreciating the visibility. And also just walking down the hall, knowing your staff and being, certainly there's professional, you know, guidelines and stuff, but to know something about each of your staff, it makes you feel a whole lot better and appreciated. And that's hard to do with all of the stuff that we have to do right now as director of student services.
Well, that was the one, if I may interrupt, I'm sorry. That's one of the most compelling kind of sections of the report, I think, is when you list out the director of student services current job responsibilities. I count, I think, 13 separate responsibilities.
At least that paragraph.
And among other things. That's how, I mean,
Sorry.
but over the last couple of years, like being responsible for nurses was a bigger deal than it was maybe before, and being responsible for testing made them so. So I one of the things you began your presentation with is we are able to look at us from outside eyes and see what we're asking people to do. That was really helpful to me.
I guess the last just end on that. I mean, they're all important, but the professional development, you have good staff and you have good abilities to build programs, and that's awesome. You know, giving good professional development really keeps people like, you know, energized, and you know, they can implement some of the things that they're learning when they go to a workshop or they're working as teams. That really keeps good staff.
The other thing I want to say about professional development, and I totally agree with Patrick, is, you know, sometimes staff goes out to a professional development, it's like a one-shot deal. They get energized for the day and they come back, and literally, because there's so much else coming at them, goes in the door, nothing happens.
So they missed today if they catch up.
Yeah. And so I really prefer professional development that happens over a period of time. You go to a conference, or you bring somebody in, and then somebody comes back and really observes and works with the teachers and folks implementing it. It makes a huge difference. I've done that with co-teaching, where, you know, I know about co-teaching, and then I would go back, I went into a community and I would observe in the classroom with the co-teachers, and we would sit down, the teacher and the co-teacher, and would say, you know, this was great. You know, what do you think about this? And then the teacher would say, I don't like this. And we did it all year long. You know, like once a month I would go in, and it made a difference. And then they got other people excited about it and wanting to do it. So
You give them the freedom to have that opportunity to bring stuff in, not the IEPs, that should be mandatory training.
Yeah.
But other stuff of best practices in their organizations, that's would be really good.
One of my priorities is the professional development, and I think specifically because the power of being able to bring all of the special education staff together at the same time is just simply something that doesn't happen because it's building or a district level. And we did do a 3-part series with Alan Bloom on IEP writing, and it was incredibly well received. And I think Christina, you went to it, and it was great, and a lot of people came. But being able to have everybody all on the same page, hearing that same information at the same time would be incredible and timely, because we are at some point going to be moving to I call it the
Which IEP is this?
new IEP project, because it's been coming for many years, but it is coming, and it's imminent, and there will be needing to be training for staff to be able to implement that new IEP.
If you have questions or
Yeah.
anything about the report, you can always contact us. You have our information. We certainly want to give any more information that can help the district. So a lot of great things going on in Littleton, which is nice to see. So,
It's good. Couple quick questions. So just Lynn, were you part of the interview process or no?
I was interviewed, but I wasn't present for the interviews when
Okay.
the staff were interviewed. No.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I see others listed, the retired special ed director or consultant was, but I didn't see your name listed specifically. I thought this was really well done, and I think this is some of the more important work that we've seen. Not, that's the wrong way to put it. I just love a third-party independent evaluation of some of the program that's taking place, because so often we hear from our own administration, our own staff, and like you said, we're doing a lot of great things, and we hear a lot of great things, but I guess my major takeaway is I agree with nearly everything that's in here. Just from a parent as an outside observer, I've often thought, how does Lynn possibly do everything she's supposed to do? Like, I think I've mentioned it a number of times, like, do we need 2 Lyns?
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Considering you were like our lead COVID person the past 2 years as well. I love the thought process here about the IEP writing and getting more of the staff involved. I'm not against PD by any stretch of the imaginations. I'm sort of against all the half days that we have in our programming. But I think some professional development related to special education inclusion, I think would do the district really well. We're currently at the tail end of our strategic plan for the district, and we're going to be recreating one. So I think this gives us a really nice Cliff Notes version of how we can look to improve over the next 3 years. Not that we're not doing a lot of it really well, but it's always about constant
Have a lot
improvement,
of good
because if
stuff,
you're
yeah.
not making constant improvement, others are, and you're sort of losing ground. So I think this is really well done, and it gives us a lot of, some opportunity for improvement going forward. So
I think what makes it easier for Patrick and I to do it too is because we've been in the public schools and worked in them, and then have the ability to go to other public schools, so we get to see a lot. I mean, you should hear us sometimes when we start to write these recommendations. We'll go back and forth and we'll say, I don't know about that one, Patrick, and he'll say, but what about this? And so that's why we like working together, because we can bounce ideas on each other and have a little bit different experiences.
And the other thing I'll note is, like, one of the reasons why I ran for this position was like, geez, I think our taxes are high in town. Like, there's got to be that in the budget. And every stone we uncover, it's like we're actually on a shoestring budget. So I do think this report highlights the fact that we need to spend a little bit of money to get substantially better in some areas. And we have some inefficiencies within special education, these other service related areas. So if we would just spend a bit more, we would get so much better. And what's nice is that we identified as, I think you've identified this for a number of years, and
Many years.
the report was coming, so it was time to take some action. We've baked some of these recommendations into the budget for next year. So we're looking to take some immediate action on this. So
The program review was really an affirmation of what we've found out throughout time. I think it's important to note, though, that our system has changed in the past 4 years because we've been keeping more students in-house
Yes.
rather than sending them out of district. And it was just a matter of time where that was going to catch up to us, and we're at that time. We did not have team chairs in this district, believe it or not. They were cut in 2005, and we were able to hire a K-5 team chair about 5 years ago. Didn't have enough money to look at 6 to 12. So we brought in a 6 to 12. It's only been 3 years. And now we're ready for that next stage. We couldn't hire administrators at that time. We didn't have the money to hire administrators at that time. But when we looked at this as a systemic change, we really didn't need them at that time because we didn't have the number of programs that we do in our districts now. So it's an evolutionary process. And the team chairs have done a great job. But one of the challenges that we've had in our district, I mean, Lynn meets with all these people, but there's only so many hours in a day for Lynn to do that. And we're at a point that we need some changes where we have 2 other people that have administrative capacity to take the helm for some of these things. IEP writing, we've been working on IEP writing 4 directors ago. But the more administrators we have to focus on working with staff, checking with staff. I mean, until we had the team chairs, the director of student services was responsible for all IEPs and approving all IEPs. So we've made some changes. When we hired the team chairs, of course, it's law. They do allocate money at team meetings. There's no doubt. There's no going back to the sped director. You can't do that. It's illegal.
Yeah.
So we managed to make sure that it worked, but we were stretching their roles. And so I'm pleased that we found very many, most of the things that we've been talking about just affirms that we're moving in the right direction and we need to really take those next steps. So thank you for that.
I'll just say one more thing as we're talking about, like Sally said, we don't want this to go in a drawer. So I look forward to having conversations about how we can act on it. I will say I was surprised by the scope. I expected this to include the PACE programs. I never occurred to me to ask. We talk about these, but not those. So if we're talking about taking a holistic look at how we deliver services, I do think that we should do that outside evaluation of those programs as well.
Well, I can speak to that too, because when we talked about doing this, we had conversations about what the scope of it would be, but given that we're still in the process of establishing programs, it really would have been a waste of time and money to have evaluators come in and look at programs that were still in a phase of being established, rather than seeing them established and then coming in to say, okay, you've got the foundation, the organizational structure, you've got these programs in place. How do you take them to the next level? That's when it's worth the money to spend and bring in outside evaluators to look at that.
What do you think the time frame on that would be, Lynn? Like next year, the
Next
following
year, right, because right now we have a full continuum of specialized programming for language-based and for our PACE programs, but this is the first year of PACE at the high school. And this is the second year really of having PACE at Russell Street established. So next year would be the perfect time to.
next year? Okay. I had this question. I felt a little awkward asking it, but you mentioned reading. I mean, I passed no judgment on this, but what did we pay for this evaluation? Does anybody? I would think that you folks would know, or we would know.
A lot of numbers in my mind, but it's not one.
Yeah,
On
I
top
think it
of my head.
was, I think it was,
9 something.
$9 grand.
yeah,
Close to
Okay.
yeah, it was $10,000.
Yeah, so 10 grand if we were to evaluate the PACE program. I mean, I get that we want to establish it and see how it goes, but it's also for $10,000.
Oh, no, the scope of this was less than what to do a full program, because if we were looking at specialized program and all the special ed teachers, the volume of interviews and time and all of that, it would be more closer to $25,000.
Okay. So we'd be evaluating not just the administrative level, but sort
We're
of,
looking at all of the.
Yeah, much wider,
Interviewing our special education.
that might be money
teachers.
well spent.
Yeah.
My point was, as opposed to build it and see how we did,
Mm.
maybe check in along the way to make sure we're building it correctly. Just my thoughts. So. Okay, awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
As promised, why don't we take a quick moment to check in? We just spent 45 minutes or so on that topic to see if we have folks either in the room or online, if we want to hear from anybody. What's that? And also, as the CPAC chair, I will gladly allow you to go over 3 minutes. We had a speaker previous in the evening who went over 3 minutes, and it was a staff member, and I'm happy to do that, but I don't know.
I thought it won't.
Okay, great.
Point.
That's perfectly fine. I just
Sometimes I get a little
over
excited.
3 is fine.
Stand here, so I didn't take
Yeah.
a pause.
Great.
But you guys could do that. Yeah, so good evening. Lynn Snow kindly shared the evaluation with the Littleton CPAC a couple of weeks ago, and we are pleased to share our feedback tonight. I just hang on a second, they left, and I just want to say that, having been on the out of district journey for quite a number of years, I have people with kids in lab that speak very highly of Mr. Barbieri. So
Very good.
it was a good report, evaluation. Yeah, so my name is Rosa Kallestad, I'm 8 Scott Road, Littleton, and I speak on behalf of CPAC. We received the evaluation, we sent it out to the group, and we gathered the feedback. The evaluation states that the consultants were hired to examine the current operational practices of the team chairs, the out-of-district coordinator, occupational therapist, physical therapist, speech pathologist, psychologist, counselors, and BCPA. This is a stated evaluation of current operational practices and looks at how these providers, administrators manage their time, their caseloads, assessment tools used, and more. The CPAC had asked for and was expecting that this would be an evaluation of the special education programs and with specific focus on substantially separate programs like the new PACE programs. But this current evaluation doesn't cover that. After speaking with Lynn Snow today, we have been reassured that the district sees this current evaluation as a first step with an evaluation of all special education programs in Littleton to follow if approved. This current evaluation has not interviewed special education teachers, TAs, parents, and children, but that should be included in a future evaluation of special ed programs. And we have the following comments to the evaluation. We agree that related service providers should have more time in the classrooms to provide more inclusive therapies to create consistent inclusion across all levels. We agree that IEP training should be top priority and that going forward, it should be consistent and not optional. I know the evaluation states that this should happen this year. After talking with Lynn Snow, there is a new IEP template being implemented and it doesn't seem to be fully there yet. So I don't know if that is possible, but definitely a priority. We also suggest that there should be a body of language that is used by all, even at different levels. There should also be a vertical articulation that exists from K to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, and 9 to 12. We would like to see more details around the assistive technology findings. We should want to make sure the technology is well vetted and appropriate to subject and grade level. It is not a one-size-fits-all model, and it can get quite expensive. We agree that service providers should have personal development that aligns to their current needs, student population, and believe it should include training in differentiated instruction or universal design for learning, cooperative learning strategies, and accommodations versus modification. We agree that caseloads should be evenly distributed, the team chairs should have more autonomy, and that a student service liaison position should be created. In general, we believe more direct student support will provide better results for our kids than adding more administrators. As to team chairs having individual contracts that are separate from the professional bargaining unit, we would like to know if other districts comparable to Littleton in the dark data are doing this. I talked to Lynn Snow about that today, and she said she had looked at that and that other districts comparable to Littleton are. But these comments, they are of course based on the expectation that Littleton data supports the evaluators' findings. The evaluation itself does not list the data, and we would very much appreciate if data would be shared with the CPAC if possible. We strongly agree that the substantially separate programs should go through an evaluation and as soon as possible. We see it as imperative that they should be staffed with fully licensed teachers with experience relevant to the student population. People who really care and wish to make these high quality programs for our kids and see the value of strong parent communication. We would like to see them have a great handle on differentiated instruction, understanding by design, universal design, and a command of many K-12 subject areas. We want to reiterate that kids with disabilities make up about 16% of the student population, and that's currently in 2021, that was 270 students. In 2021, only 19% of those kids met expectations on the MCAS exams and everything. No child exceeded expectation, and that this is according to DESI statistics that are online. In 2022, only 18.5% of kids with disabilities met or exceeded expectations. In other words, more than 80% of kids with disabilities in our school district does not meet or only partially meet expectations. This substantial ESSER funds Littleton was provided with does not seem to have been a help so far for our kids. Also, in the period from 2012 to 2022, 10 years, there were only AP tests taken by kids with disabilities in the school year 2016 to 17, 9 tests, 2017 to 18, 1 test. And those are the only AP tests taken by kids with disabilities during these 10 years, according to available statistics. According to other DESI statistics, there are only 4 of these 270 children who have intellectual disabilities. So there's really no reason why they shouldn't be achieving better. So we need to prioritize that academic outcomes improves for this population, our kids. And while we wait for concrete feedback on how to improve our kids' outcomes, the data and parent feedback tells us that not all our current programs are providing what our kids need to succeed. We hear from parents struggling to have their kids' needs evaluated, recognized, and met, both in the substantially separate programs and in general education. We have heard about families meeting an administrative wall, feeling pressured into these programs without being offered options that would work better for their child. We have heard about very short-term settlement agreements being offered that lets a child move to an out-of-district school for a short period, but leaves the families with few rights, and at the end of the term, the child does not have an IEP that provides the services and support they need to succeed going forward. We have also heard from families sharing that these separate programs have been suggested as appropriate for their children who are well capable of being part of general education if they receive appropriate support and inclusion. So it's a very important concept that all children are in the least restrictive environment, according to the law. And I'm pretty sure I'm over 3 minutes, but almost done. So these situations that we hear about, and I'm sure there's lots of parents that are very happy and lots of people doing a very good job, but the situations that we hear about are very, very hard to hear. And they create unnecessary tension between families in need of support and the school system. The evaluation mentions current lack of availability at out-of-district schools and other issues at out-of-district schools as a reason to implement these programs. COVID, it caused issues for everyone. But when dealing with children with disabilities, you have to have a child-centric view, not a school-centric view, because the child is supposed to receive the services the child needs to progress and make it, to make effective progress. That's according to law. So if the programs in Littleton cannot yet provide that, other options has to be seen as available and offered, even if that means out of district school. I'm all for keeping kids in district, and thriving in their own community. I wish my own daughter would have been able to do that. But only if they can receive a free and appropriate education. Yeah, so we ask that the current situation is improved by having a strong third-party evaluation of the special education programs that documents the program's effectiveness as well as find areas of improvement, as also the evaluators said. And we ask that this is done as quickly as possible because these programs are already operational and there are children in them. Since these programs have not yet been evaluated, we also ask that good alternatives are provided to families if needed in order for the child to receive a free and appropriate education. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's anybody else who wishes to speak for the school committee. This topic before we move on to the next presentation, I don't see anybody. Thank you very much for your remarks. Sort of came out of the last presentation, but perhaps the administration could report back to us at a meeting or so, or at least before the end of the school year as to when you think we might be able to perform a more extensive evaluation. If it's, this one was done in June, which my suspicion is that that's a good time to do an evaluation because it's like at the end of the year and we can reflect upon what we've done versus doing it at the beginning of the year.
To kind of start it. If you
Yeah.
use a similar kind of
Yeah.
timeframe, I think this worked out really well.
Yeah, I was just more interested in when you think, what your feedback would be for when you might like to try to put something in place. And then, if it was the end of this year, great. We think it needs to be the following school year. And there's reasons behind so there's, I think that's potentially a call to action. I don't know if I have support on that, but
I think it's as soon as possible and appropriate, but I don't expect y'all to answer now.
yeah,
But we share, CPAC has expressed their concern or their interest. I think we all want to get this right. So let's get some eyes on it when we can.
Yeah, I mean, we're committed to do a review. We just want to make sure our program that we've just implemented are up and running. We don't want to spend $30,000 and then have to go back and spend another 15 because we weren't ready to do it. What I would like from you this evening, if possible, is there are recommendations specific to moving team chairs into the administrative unit. The reorganization of the out-of-district coordinator has already begun, but that's minor. If you feel as a school committee you want to proceed with that, we've incorporated into the budget. There's a process I need to go through if we're going to do that, and I need to start more correctly sooner than later. So if you feel this is the direction that you would like to move in, I can give you my recommendation. I've been wanting to do this for 9 years. I would be very pleased if you felt the same way and we could start the process.
Is there impact to the budget in doing that?
There is $30,000 for moving them into administrative contracts. Plus, one of the recommendations in the report, and it's something Lynn and I need to continue to tease out, was to hire more clerical staff for special education. That's another $50,000. We do need to do that, but I need to get a better handle on exactly what needs to be done because all of our stuff is electronic. We do run on paper within our office because we have to legally, but we don't run a piece of paper off unless we have to. So I have to get a better understanding of what that entails. I'd like it, if possible, left in as a placeholder while I work with Lynn and tease out exactly what do we do with the clerical
Can
component.
I just clarify too, that moving them, it also extends their work year. They would be working longer than the 182 days.
Right.
And so that was my question is that, do they get any say in this?
Sorry.
Would these people get any say in this? Oh, if the people, if I'm in this role and I find out tomorrow that I'm now an administrator, then, and that means that I can't, my July is encumbered in ways it wasn't before. And things I don't know how this works.
Okay. I'm glad you asked that question. I mean,
First and
do they know this is coming?
Yeah.
Of course they do. Are they reticent about moving into a new category? No, they're not. So we're fortunate that way, but I need to put my cards on the table. As a superintendent, my job is to make sure we provide the best educational opportunities for all students. And my priority is students and staff, but students' needs have to be made. So if I didn't have that and we needed to move forward, I would try to place those individuals in another position in the district if we got openings. But I would still move forward with the change.
So last meeting, we looked at the preliminary budgeting for fiscal year next year. And there were 3 items on there, the 30, the 50, and then the general ed teacher potentially for 6th grade, 80, 85.
Right.
So I think last meeting, we all said that we were okay with you moving forward with those proposed changes. So the school committee's in full support of that.
Oh, perfect. That's great. Thank you.
Now we just know why.
And whether it's a piece of paper or it's an electronic form, it still requires a human's attention. And I think the evaluation suggests that when you've got someone that's, capable of higher level work at a higher pay grade, we'd rather have them doing that than spending time in front of a computer, not walking the halls, checking the teachers, meeting with families. That's more impactful. So
I agree 100%. I mean, what I'm trying to do is make sure that every dollar we spend as a district is going as close to the student as possible.
sure.
So that's why I'm being cautious. I mean, do I think we need a position like that? No doubt, but I just want to make sure that that's the best.
I think we're gonna get a good return on our money here. We're, for every dollar spent, we're gonna get more than $1 back.
Yeah, that's gonna free up a lot of, it's a 20-hour position or whatever it is. That's gonna free up 20 hours of specialists spending with families and kids, and it's worth the money.
Okay, terrific. All right. Without further ado, let's move on to the second presentation, which is survey results, school start time, survey 2. School start time subcommittee will discuss the results of the recent survey that was distributed to families, staff, middle school, high school students, with a potential motion at the end of the presentation.
Thank you.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
No, don't be sorry. This is great stuff. Okay, so I'm going to start. Beanal and I are going to give this presentation, and before I'm going to speak slowly because I want Brad to be in the room to hear the context. I think we have some important background and context to share before we actually get into sharing the survey results. We can catch Brad up afterwards, but next slide, please. So we embarked on this project. I want to remind everybody why we embarked on this project before we get into sharing the community input, which is very important. But there's a lot more to this project than just the community input, right? That's a very, very important piece of it. But the reason we started doing this investigation and all this research was because there is a tremendous amount of science-backed data that's been coming out over the past decade plus that's shown that adolescents need more sleep, and that across the country, schools everywhere are starting to really make changes to their start times. And next slide, please. I just want to kind of highlight a couple of key points and go into a couple of just 2 specific studies to really remind everybody how impactful these changes are and how important this is to look into. So just to level set, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended a middle and high school start time of 8:30 a.m. or later. And there are many professional organizations that have backed this recommendation as well, listed in the second bullet. The very, very reputable organizations have backed this recommendation. Studies show clear links between insufficient sleep in adolescents in behavioral and physical situations such as obesity, diabetes, depression, suicidal thoughts, athletic injury, car accidents, and more. And each of these are backed up by data and scientific studies. And the studies also show that later school start times are associated with, on the positive side, better grades, higher test scores, improved focus, and self-regulation among adolescent students. And then just some data points around average start times. As of 2017, the average start time in the US for public high schools nationwide was 8 a.m. And that has definitely shifted later over the past 5 years. That's the most recent stat we could find, but it's shifted later since more and more schools have started shifting later. And only, again, as of a couple of years ago, only 10% of schools nationwide started before 7:30.
Littleton Middle School and High School start at 7:15 and 7:20 respectively. So you could say that we are leaders or laggards, but I think we are definitely outliers, depending how you want to look at it. Next slide. So Massachusetts start times are changing. In Massachusetts schools, shifting to later start times is having a positive impact across the board. And I wanted to just focus in on one case study here, Nauset High School, because I found a lot of data points on them. They shifted a few years ago, about an hour later. Tardiness declined by 30%, a huge drop in failing grades, a huge drop in suspensions for disciplinary reasons. And there's a quote here from the principal of that school saying, I think the tone of the day has changed dramatically, reflected in the mood of the student body. It's clear there's a more relaxed opening of school than with the earlier start times. Students are more alert. They're not rushing around to start school. Next slide, because I want to go into
Full disclosure, my wife is a superintendent at Nauset Regional Public Schools.
so you're familiar with this.
So I had a question, maybe you know the answer.
I try not to talk shop.
Well, maybe, so they moved an hour and 15 minutes. I mean, they didn't do that by going to a one-tier bus system, I guess. They didn't do that by moving everybody an hour and 15 minutes. So they must have swapped time slots. They probably had elementary kids go earlier in high school. It's on the next slide.
It's not.
No, it's not.
Oh,
This is a district that is
how do they do this?
an old-fashioned regional school district.
Yeah.
Where they have 7 different school committees, 7 different budgets, 7 different transportation plans. So the high school has their own configuration for busing. It all comes together in the end, but they have a high school committee that focuses on the high school, and then they have a middle school as well as regional. So the change really came from the high school committee in the central office.
So they didn't have to worry about the elementary schools.
No, they were taken care of by
It was
separate school committees.
Yeah, it was an independent decision.
Right.
Okay, they got off easy. All right.
Dorothy, if you go back 2 slides, back to the slide that we were on just a moment ago. Yeah, thanks. So there's another slide that didn't make it into the deck, but I want to speak to it because I think it's really, really critical. John Harrington provided us late breaking news earlier today. A really, really interesting breakdown of the schools around us that have made changes. And it's actually more than I expected. I thought there were a small handful, but in fact, I don't know, a quick count here, about 10 or 15 schools in the area have actually changed to later start times. I don't have a slide here. I can. Yeah. I mean, we have Lunenburg, Westboro, AB, Harvard, Air, Shirley, Marlboro, Algonquin, Gardner, Lincoln, Sudbury, Concord, Weston, Watertown, and Wayland have all changed their start times to be later over the past few years. There are a smaller handful of also surrounding schools that are keeping their times as of now that are also starting around the same time as Littleton. But what this shows me is that this is the way the winds are blowing. And within all the research that we did over the past couple of months, one thing I learned is that it's the same no matter where you look at. Like everyone has every school district is saying, we know this is important. We have to do it at some point. The problems are logistical. Like it's just logistical problems. It's budget, it's buses, that's it, and athletics. But it's really the budget and the buses. Athletics, they can figure it out. So pretty much everyone is saying, we need to do this. We just need to figure out how, and it's going to happen sooner or later, which is where we are now. I just think that, the time is now for us to figure it out, as many of our surrounding towns are doing.
So while Jen was talking, I was counting or trying to, and it looks like, I think these are the 20-something schools that Dr. Harrington said he's going to talk with last time.
Exactly.
If I'm counting correctly, maybe I'm not. 2 are under review. That's us and Shrewsbury. 13 have already changed them, with the earliest start time being 7:45 and the latest start time 8:30 and 8:45. And it looks like 6 or 7 are currently not reviewing. So of the 20-something schools, 2/3 have changed or considered.
Yes,
Okay.
that's about right. Thank you. And it's a lot. I mean, this is the way the winds are blowing. And then very quickly, I wanted to talk about 2 different studies that were done. If you go to the slide that says Seattle, Dorothy. The Seattle public school system. They shifted, this is a couple of years ago, they shifted their start times about an hour, about 50 minutes from 7:50 to 8:40. They monitored the impact on student sleep. And one thing these studies, this and the next study that I'm going to share show are that it says Seattle, I don't know.
I was trying to pull up, like,
There you go.
I found the one that I thought.
Oh, that's fine.
It's okay.
It's okay. One piece of feedback that we got from a lot of the community was, hey, if you make the start times later for the older kids, they're just gonna go to bed later. And it's just gonna shift everything later. They're gonna stay up playing video games late. And this and another study show that that is not actually what has happened. Empirically, it's not what happens when you shift the start times later. In Seattle, the data shows that students at these high schools got more sleep on school nights after start times were pushed later. It was about 34 minutes of sleep, extra sleep each night. They went from very little sleep to a little bit less sleep, but 6 hours and 50 minutes to increase to 7 hours and 24 minutes. And the study found that after the change in times, students did not stay up significantly later. They simply slept in longer, which is consistent with what scientists say is consistent with the natural biological rhythms. And there's another study, really impressive study that was done. It was the only longitudinal study of 28,000 students over the course of 2 years. Next slide, please. That it was a very, very scientific study. I was very impressed with it. And not only did it show that older students got more sleep when they shifted the school start times later, but they tracked elementary school students as well as the older kids. And over the course of 2 years, right? 28,000. And they found that the percentage of elementary school students who often did have to shift earlier because, in order to allow the older kids to start later, the percentage of elementary school students reporting, sufficient duration, poor sleep quality, or daytime sleepiness did not change. So there was very, very little to no impact on the younger kids, some of whom did have to, to start earlier. But the percentage of the older students reporting all these things as well increased and sleepiness decreased. So the benefits seem to transfer to the older students while not shifting away from the younger students, which is really important because this is the biggest and best, longitudinal, meaning year after year study that was done ever, basically.
If I can jump in just to point out though, that in the models we're considering, the elementary school students will not be going
They won't.
earlier, much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You're right.
That's right.
Yeah.
We're not
even
trying not to let perfect be the enemy of good, but if we were actually considering the best possible scenario from these models, we'd be talking about elementary school starting at 8 and high school, middle school starting at 9.
Right.
2-tier and flip.
Right.
Which would-
That's right.
Which we could talk about.
Right.
There would be significant impacts.
Right.
Right.
Particularly to scheduling and athletics and childcare, and there's a lot of issues we'd have to resolve, but it's something this school committee and future school committees should keep in mind. That what
Yes.
we talk about today should be reconsidered a few years from now as trends continue to change.
Right. Exactly. And exactly. I mean, the first point I mentioned was 8:30 or later, and we're not even close to that. We're suggesting 7:55 or 8 as a 30 to 40 minute, change. But
And that's even on the lower spectrum of all the schools that have already changed.
That's
are already
right.
8 or later.
That's right.
So where we still need to met that.
Right. So, the solutions that we've come up with that we did the second survey vote on were really truly took into account community input and very deep, strong concerns from parents of the younger children about childcare and older siblings getting home later than younger siblings. And, we really looked at that option 6 to help try to mitigate some of those community concerns, yet also give these kids, the older kids, an extra, a bit of sleep. So, so I think is a good observation. Finally, I think it was important to note that in terms of equity, like the benefits of later start times were similar across economic situations and racial groups. So it was a very equitable thing. It works across all groups of kids. And with that, again, I mean, just keep in mind, I think it's obvious, but like we embarked on this whole thing to get, not to make everything better for everybody, but really to get the adolescent students, the middle school and high school students more sleep, which they need, and hopefully make the change as least disruptive for the rest of the community as possible. So with that, Dana will share the results of the second
Yeah. So the second start time survey, I think we gave people about a week and a half, some of which was Thanksgiving. And so we're really appreciative of the over 1,200 responses that we got, which is really incredible because we had 1,300 or so the first time. So I'm pretty blown away. I was not expecting that much. But it really just goes to show how important and central of an issue this is for our community, staff, students, and families. So in this survey, we embarked on the survey in a very specific way based on the discussion that we had from the last one. And it was 5 questions, there was no comments, and it was really done for a specific purpose. So we narrowed it down to these 3 options as we talked about the shift 25 plus the switch with Shaker Lane and Russell Street. So this does move then Russell Street to that later time and put Shaker Lane in the middle. The 2-tier option, and we switched out the first 2-tier option and replaced it with this one we talked about in the last meeting. And then the current schedule, we really asked the community to give us their feedback on each. So next slide. This question really goes to that continuum that we had a good discussion about last time, and are people here and are people here? So this is a very clear question. In favor of changing the start times, in favor of keeping them, or not sure, it depends on what it is. And so this gives a really clear picture. We've got about 50% of the community that would like to change it, regardless of which of the 2 options they are. We have 34% of the community that very strongly feels it needs to stay the same, and 16% it depends on what the change is. And then if you broke it down, we did, the highest number of responses, of course, in the highest number of constituents we have are the parents in this scenario versus the number of staff and number of students. And so you'll see the largest percent of the supporters of the change in the start time are the parents. And the largest supporters of keeping the current schedule are the staff. And there is some more breakout of this too by school because it's not consistent across school. And it's not surprising and very much in line with the feedback that we heard earlier. The most ideal start time is 8 a.m. So the faculty that was most against changing were the ones that are at 8 a.m., which makes sense because the ones that would like to change are the ones that would like to change it to 8 a.m. So ideally, we have 20 buses and everyone starts at 8 a.m. and we get probably 100% buy-in because that's what you'll see consistently is this 8 to 3 is the perfect time for children to learn, for staff to work out their schedules, and anybody shifting away from it does not want to change it, and anyone shifting to it does. So that's really in line with what we saw with staff feedback and students as well, sort of a split between keep and change the start times. And again, more middle school students actually wanting to change and not surprising. And I think the question was asked last time because 6th grade is sort of that first time you experience that big shift. And so maybe by high school, they get used to it or they've revolved their life around it. But more middle schoolers voted for the change and then high schoolers. So broken out by school, just trying to break it out in different ways, but again, just similar.
All members of these communities.
Yeah.
Parents, staff, students.
Yeah, so I didn't do like Shaker Lane and then broken out by each. It's just we'd be looking at 50 slides, but wanted to just let you have an idea by school. And then the next slide. So the very first question talks about or asks people to pick between the 3-tier shift 25 and then the current schedule. And so you'll see I had originally made all the questions required and got some feedback about people feeling like if they didn't want either of those options, they didn't want to be forced to make a choice. So didn't make the questions required. And so of the 1,254 that filled it out, there were 1,149 that filled out this question. I put that number so you'll see in each, there's different numbers of people. And so a little bit more than half would prefer even the shifting 25 minutes and switching Shaker Lane Russell Street versus keeping the current schedule. And then next slide. If you look at the vote by participant, again, just for your FYI, this is how it breaks out between the families, just staff and the students. So again, not a real preference with the staff in the shifting the schedule. And again, more Russell Street staff really voting against that. And then almost split down the middle
with parents and students between these two options. And then the shift or the breakdown by school. So these two, they're pretty close between the current schedule and the shift. Little bit of a preference towards the shift, but only in some groups. So the next question, this asked people to vote between the current schedule and the two-tier option. And so this had 1,200 votes, and you can see in that case, about 39% voted for the current schedule and 61% for the two-tier. And then in the next slide, broken out by participant, a big chunk of that is the parents. So parents in every school were in favor of the two-tier versus the current option. So that was across the board. The staff in Shaker Lane were in favor of the two-tier option, 60% of them. At Russell Street, 75% voted to keep the current schedule. So again, in line with the feedback we've heard, that 8 a.m., they don't want to switch it, and I don't blame them. It's not ideal. And so 75% of the staff share that feedback. And staff in high school, middle school were in favor of the current schedule by 57%. So it's almost down the middle, but that difference is 3 to 5 votes. And we're talking about, I'm reading my own notes that I took here, but just so you can understand this breakout of the staff. When we're talking about a variation of 57%, 43%, we're talking about 3 staff. That really splits it up. And then again, in the middle school, there was more students in favor of the two-tier option, but in the high school, there was a few more students in favor of the current schedule. And so that's where we sort of see that almost 50-50 split. And then the breakout by school. And what's interesting in the two-tier, this doesn't change the Shaker Lane time actually in the two-tier. It actually keeps their. So I found it interesting that we don't, this is the largest landslide, the 74 and 26 we see anywhere. And maybe they're thinking sort of, if I'm going to stay in the same time, I might as well get the benefit later. I don't know. I don't know what the thought behind this one. And then the last one, we asked people to vote between the two-tier and then the shifting 25 minutes. And between these two, the two-tier was a preference by 68% versus 32%. And then broken out by participant, definitely a preference with the parents across all schools again. For the staff, 88% of Russell Street's and Shaker Lane staff preferred the two-tier over the shift. It's sort of the lesser of two evils in this scenario. And so that was a pretty large percentage. And 70% of middle school staff and about 55% of the high school staff actually preferred the 25-minute shift. And so again, we end up with this 50-50, but there was more Russell Street, Shaker Lane staff preferring the two-tier option and high school, middle school staff preferring the three-tier shift option.
I'll just note that the staff number goes from 154 and 155 when it's choosing between current and one of the options. Where in the 20 people just chose not to participate in this question.
Yes, and so those 20 people you should assume want the current schedule
Yeah.
in either of these options. And then for students, about 70% of students in the middle school preferred the two-tier. As I mentioned, that's sort of when you get the shock of that new schedule. And in the high school, it's 50-50. And that's pretty consistent with the 1,000 or so comments from the first community survey. For every student that said they wanted to change the time, there was a student that said they didn't. So it's not surprising. We've just got night owls and morning risers, I think, and people have their preference. And so that was pretty much right down the middle, but there's a little bit of a skew towards the two-tier because the middle school students definitely had a preference for the two-tier. And then the breakout by school for that last question. And then we put these back in here because we thought, it was interesting to just see sort of where Littleton is in comparison to schools in the neighboring area, and this, Jen talked about some of these, and they're in the deck that we sent sort of like right before this meeting, because it was hot off the press. So you can look at the schools that have changed their time, but next slide, if we go to next slide, a number of these, as we heard from Jen already, have already made that shift. And I think that was one of the questions that was asked last time. So thank you to John. I think you're on Zoom somewhere for collecting that data and getting it to us and talking to the principals, but we just wanted to share this again in case there were any thoughts or comments this time around.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Nice job. Why don't we see if there's any discussion among the school committee, and then I'll open it up for public comment. When we get, I feel like the public's had a lot of opportunity to comment, so in the event that a lot of people want to talk in Zoom land, we'll be pretty strict about the 2-minute thing. And then we'll see if there's an appetite to move forward with the vote, and we'll move on from there. So I don't know, Dina and Jen just did a lot of talking, so why don't we ask Stacy, do you have any questions, comments, feedback?
Start.
Yeah, sure.
I think I'm gonna let you guys start with questions. You guys always look back with more. But I think you presented it really well. It seems like it's something that we should definitely explore and progress with. And, I understand there's some feedback that it's going to be a difficult change, but I think any change is difficult. I spoke to one of the school committee members at Brownfield. They just changed last year, and she said they changed the same thing. We had some feedback that we didn't want the change, and now everybody's on board with it, and everyone's doing good, and it's all positive feedback. So I think we know we're gonna run into some problems and some difficult things that we have to work through, but the science is showing that this is better for the kids. And that's our main focus. So it's certainly something that if it's not done now, I foresee it being done in the future in our school system. So, but I'm curious to see what other questions you guys have. That always inspires me.
Yeah, I'd like to begin just by saying I think I'm really happy with our process and want to give Jen and Beetle some credit for that. I want to thank you for the presentations. I want to thank the community members who participated in the survey. And the athletic director and the principals and the administrative staff and the parents and the teachers who were part of this. Like Stacey's saying, this is a big decision. It's one this committee has talked about tackling for the last 10 or 12 years. We're tackling it now, but I wouldn't feel comfortable doing so unless we had all these opportunities to hear from people. And having 2 surveys with 1,100, 1,200 responses makes me feel like we're taking the time to do this right. One thing I sometimes we just need to say is that I think this committee, the leadership of our chair, operates appropriately. I have no idea what people are thinking on this. We haven't talked about it outside of committee. No one's whipped votes. I have no idea what's going to happen. And that's the way it should happen. This should be a community discussion. It should take place in front of the community. And so I think our process has been good. I think the scientific medical consensus is clear. The studies you shared, the studies, the end databases I queried, the lit reviews of 38 studies all show the same things you're finding. We had that presentation from the parents earlier where they're citing the MIAA athletic directors who are saying in 2016 they support later start times. It's just clear. It's also clear there's not an overwhelming community consensus. But as I'm looking at the numbers, and this is I can get into the question here, is we had the 50% change something. We have 1/3 don't. And then we have the 16%, I don't know, it depends. But when we did the I don't know, it depends kind of crosstabs, it looks like half of those, whether when they're compared to don't do anything or do something, in both times was do nothing versus do something, the do something won.
Mm-hmm.
So am I right in reading that? It's a 50% plus 54% of 16% or 50% plus, right? You see what I'm saying? Is that within that 16% of those?
The 2 options that we offered were the ones that were the top.
Right.
We chose those. If they had been one of the previous options, perhaps that 16% would have voted to keep it.
Right.
But that's why we ended up with the 2 that we did in the top 3.
So as I'm reading this, and we can think about how are we supposed to just represent community survey results or kind of look at the stuff and make decisions ourselves? As I'm looking at this, I see 50% who wants to do something, 16% who's not sure, but when you dig down into the other survey results, it looks like at least 50 to 60% of that 16% say, no, we should do something if it's this thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at a 60 to 63% maybe kind of mandate to do something, which is important to me. Not decisive, but important. And the last thing I'll just say is that what we're really doing is we're writing cost benefit analysis. Sometimes it's the cost benefit of the humanity of the people who are having to deal with the real world issues of childcare and commutes and things like that. Sometimes it's cost benefit of, we heard reports about earlier about how do we staff the unified arts, and is that going to be finding the logistics for that? But it's also the cost benefit, literally the number cost of buses if we decide for one of these options. It's my thoughts. I'm glad we're here. I'm glad we're taking this on, and I look forward to hearing what y'all think.
I want to just quickly say something to your point. The 50% of people that say, or rather the 34% saying keep the current schedule. I think just as humans, there is a bias toward
Inertia.
Inertia, thank you, that's the right word, and a bias against change. Understandably, we're all parents here, we get it, like you cobble together solutions around the circumstances you're given. And all of us that have kids and have figured out, I mean, childcare in this country is a problem, no matter what school start times are. These kids are in school for a set number of hours, and most people that work are working more than those hours. So there's a problem on either end.
Yep.
People who cobble together a solution, I don't blame any of them, including my own family. It's going to be tough to reschedule that, refigure that out. That can't, prevent us from making changes that need to be made. And also, if you think about future years of new people coming into this school community, they will be starting with a blank slate, and they will have to cobble together their own solutions with whatever their hand they're dealt, right? So it's a it's a real problem, but it's an inevitable problem. It's also kind of a short-term view to say, look, we've worked it out thus far and we can't make any changes. People will have to figure it out one way or the other. So it's just.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
And I've been back and forth on this topic. It's been odd for me. I don't have a dog in the fight. I feel like it'd be kind of okay either way. Not to say that I don't have kids in the school system, but I've come to the conclusion that I think it's worth trying to move to a two-tier system. I think that as the town's grown and new subdivisions have gone in and we've sort of spread out, and we perhaps have maybe just outgrown, perhaps a three-tier run. And I think the time is right to look at it now. I know that the town's going to disagree based upon the budgeting forecast, but I'm comfortable saying it's worth a shot to move to two tiers. Out of tonight's conversation, I think like the most impactful decision would actually be to move to two tiers and then flip, because we'd spend 280 and the kids that need the developmental sleep would actually get something like almost 90 minutes. The Russell Street staff would actually stay put with your time with the two tier and the flip. I don't know that.
You tell the athletic.
Yeah.
I mean, athletics get pushed to almost. We could do it in such a way that the high school gets out of 3. It says on Brad's cheat sheet, it says 310, but that's like going. I think the first baby steps. I think the first thing is I'm comfortable trying to go to two tier, see if we can find the money. The town's not just going to write a check for the 280. Like, we're going to have to put our heads together and try to figure out. Because FinCom made it kind of clear last meeting, like, you're going to likely get X dollars, spend it how you want. And if we decide that this is a priority within the school district and we want to do this, not suggesting that we make unnecessary cuts in other places, but I think it's worth a shot, in my opinion. And if we come to the conclusion that it's a great idea and we just don't have the dollars for it in the present year, we can always try again next budget cycle. But like I said, I've been back and forth on the topic, and that's where my head's at. Is let's try for it. And if we end up going all the way to a two-tier and flip, then we've really made an impactful change based upon data that I've seen.
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel strongly we should move to a two-tier system. I think it's equitable. I mean, I think it doesn't leave any of the schools in that super early spot. It really minimizes the impact as we said, there's a sweet spot of 8 AM and then there's like the really crappy early and the really crappy super late. This kind of gives all four of the schools a decent start and end time.
Yeah, it shrinks it literally between 8 and 9.
Yeah.
So like, no one can be totally dissatisfied with the start times.
Right.
I mean,
And combining, Shaker Lane and Russell Street, there are benefits to that. There are benefits to the teachers. There are benefits to professional development days where they are getting out at the same time and they can start at the same time. The specialists can move between schools and not have to be sitting in a parking lot waiting. So, there are definitely benefits to that. It makes the most sense. I agree with you. I think flipping it as well, it'll be a lot to push for this year. And there are.
that's the stage though. Like,
It does.
we can't,
It does.
yeah.
It does set the stage. It puts the structure into place to potentially do that later on.
Anybody else among us, or we'll open up the public comment? Kelly, you have anything to say?
I agree with what you said. I mean, if we're gonna do this, we need to make sure that we're comfortable with what we're doing. And money is an obstacle, but at the same time, money shouldn't be the sole driver in deciding what option we feel is best for our students. In my opinion, if we're comfortable moving forward, the two-tier system is the best system to go with. So.
Brad, you said something in the last school committee meeting. I think you said budgets are reflective of priorities.
They are.
To me, this is a mental health, it's a social emotional thing, after the past few years, we can take all the benefits we can get toward getting the kids the right foundations that they need. I think we as a school system are all moving in the direction of continuing to give the kids everything they need in terms of support. And to me, this is just falls squarely in line with that. So asking for that money and trying to put our pencil to paper and figure out how to get that money or save money elsewhere and spend that money on the right thing, I think this is the right place to do it.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I was about to say it again, because I really believe it. Our budgets reflect our priorities. And we were talking about the two-tier flip as if it's in calling it impactful. I think it would be the most impactful. I think doing this would be impactful in really powerful ways, and it should be. If we're asking for an extra $230,000, $240,000 spend, again, that's about 1% of our budget. It should be meaningful. We shouldn't do that cavalierly. We should do that with thought, and we should have reservations about it. But it's I think it'll have a real impact. And I think that because all of these studies convinced me. I came in here without a preconceived notion. I've been convinced. I think it's worth the money. I think we should fight for it. I think we should do it.
Okay. Before we potentially call for a vote, why don't we see if there are any members from the community that wish to speak on the topic?
Christine, please state your name, your street, and your question, please. Christine? Christine, you muted?
There it is.
Got it.
No, I've been waiting for Dorothy to say you're muted for a long time. I missed it, Dorothy.
Christine, are you there?
Yeah, she's still muted. We'll give it a second. We'll see if there's anybody, Christine's the only hand up. We'll see if there's anybody else that wishes to speak.
We do have inside questions. If I'm allowed.
Sure. Time to the podium. Sure.
Special ed teacher, also speaks well. I just had a question. So now if you vote 2-tier, 3-tier, but the times that people had voted on would change? Is that what it is?
No. So we essentially what we would look to do, because we have to figure out how to allocate the money or the resources if we move to a 2-tier system. So I think what we're going to look to do is vote no change, move to a 2-tier, or slide to 25. The three options that were in the survey.
Okay.
Just clear, and the 2-tier option was the option 6 that you said you didn't get a clear shot at last time. Okay, yeah.
So option 6, so the first survey, we sent out 2 surveys.
Yes.
The first survey had a few options, one of which was a 2-tier option. Based on the feedback we got back from that survey, we actually changed that two-tier option to option 6, what we're calling it, and we sort of colloquially called it that, but option 6, which is what people voted on in the second survey, was to put the middle school and the high school students on a single set of bus routes, start around 8 a.m., 7:55 or 8 a.m., and then put Russell Street and Shaker Lane also on one set of bus routes and start them around 9. So
8:45 and 8:50 is what.
8:45, 8:50, so.
Yeah.
Right, so Russell Street would start later, Shaker Lane would start around the same time. And the middle school and high school would get to start quite a bit later.
That the 7:55 and.
Yeah.
Yes,
two
yes,
the
yeah.
7:50. Okay, so that was my question.
It is the most impactful. You know, Russell Street slides from that most desirable slot of 8 to something other than 8,
8:45.
but
Add like 30 minutes to Russell Street.
40 minutes. And I think that's something that, we talked a little bit about. It's not 25, like 25, not for Russell Street.
no,
It's a different option.
Yeah.
yeah,
Also, like with that time, it's the like least desirable time. So the option one times, it gives the high school some sleep in, but not as much. But I do appreciate if Russell Street and Shaker Lane are clustered together because our professional development,
Right.
We're waiting around.
Right, that's the benefit. I mean,
So the
yeah.
benefit, but it's,
And I do think, Christina, we have heard feedback from you as well as Shaker Lane staff, and I would want to acknowledge that even if the two-tier option is voted in tonight, that we do not solve the problem of that time slot for Shaker Lane and Russell Street, nor do we solve what the research is telling us, which is that the times are after 8:30.
Right.
And so this option 2 presents its own set of challenges that would still have to be reviewed. I don't know if we want to put like an option 7 on the table where this is flip, but I think
No, not.
based on our subcommittee and all the criteria and just like where towns are near us, it feels very challenging for high school and middle school to be 9, Shaker Lane, Russell Street to be 8 o'clock today. But I think, and I'll speak just for me, that for me would be the ultimate goal, because I think that based on the feedback we've heard from staff, from how children learn, from what benefits adolescents, would be more of an ideal scenario.
8 and 9.
But flipped. But it just doesn't feel possible today based on many other criteria and challenges and things. So it sounds like we're hoping, 2-tier can be considered, or it's potential that 2-tier can be considered. And then that's a discussion.
And to give you some more background, like when we started this process last spring, one of the things we did was we formed a subcommittee and we got together and we had everybody put in almost like deal breaker criteria, like that we could not, so for example, Michelle Kane was like, you cannot start Shaker Lane after 9 a.m. Like these kids are already like melting down. Mike Lynn, the athletic director, said for athletics, you cannot start the middle school or high school like 1 minute after 8:30. And we took those things as gospel. I mean, these are the professionals, these are the masters of their world, right? So we didn't look deeper into that, Now, going forward, we could unpack some of that. We could say, Mike Lynn, what about 9 a.m.? Could that, but I think this year, like, we have to go within those limitations that we were given from the people that know their worlds the best.
Well, and I think part of the reason those limitations are there is also what's happening around us. So like Cambridge, Winchester, they've all started to move to 9. And so it makes it easier, right, for their athletics to be that. Our area has started moving to 8. And so that become easier, but the trend could start moving in that direction too, and the conversation will change.
Sports, if all the schools started shifting to 9, it's like,
and not just sports, but after school, we heard a lot from the students about jobs and after school activities. And because we're sort of situated in the 7:15 to 8 area of the state,
right?
But in Eastern Massachusetts, if you look, the trend is very much 8:30 to 9. And so all the businesses and after school things have accommodated accordingly.
Just one last thought. Was it ever brought up looking at option 1, even though it says 3-tier, of making that a 2-tier? So then Shaker Lane and Russell Street both have like a 25-minute change. Like, was that ever an option, like Shaker Lane, Russell, like making option 1 a 2-tier and just sliding up Russell Street? Because then
that schedule that Shaker Lane is having such challenges wouldn't become, now it's gonna become both of our challenges.
Yeah, so you're saying take option 2, but make it 10 minutes earlier almost.
Which would
Ish.
really diminish what we were trying to do with the middle school and high school
Right.
to
Give them
give them more time.
Time, give them
It,
later.
it's just an option because either one is now gonna create a difficult time for Russell Street and Shaker Lane, because now you're giving, not you, it would provide, it would make Russell Street and Shaker Lane both have the not ideal time for those students.
Right. Unfortunately, I mean, the purpose of this whole thing is to give older kids more time to sleep in without making it their start time so late that
Yeah.
sports and jobs are too badly affected. So
Which I completely understand, but I'm also an advocate for the
Get it.
kids.
totally get it.
That's, my passion in life is to advocate for my kids,
Yeah, totally
especially
get
those children with disabilities, because I am telling you, 1 o'clock, anything after lunch. So I think that you are going to now you're gonna have two problems. Now it's Shaker Lane and now you got Russell Street, and those are when kids are learning as well. So they do not that they're not learning,
But the-
but it's just something to put out there that when you're living it every day, you're experiencing it every day, it's different. And I understand research, everything should be researched. So beautiful job. But
No, we hear you. It's not, I mean, as we said, if we have 20 buses, we would start everybody at 8 a.m.
I know, but even the first option, but it doesn't really help with the, if middle school and high school started at 8, and then we could be, I don't know how long a road takes, 8:30 or 8:40, 8 and 8:40, that would be, once you crank past.
Taking
the
about
two-
45 minutes to run the routes.
Yeah.
That's one of the issues. I mean,
Yeah.
But that is two tiers at the 8 and 8:45
Yeah.
and 8 and
Yeah.
8:50. So then you're saying 8:40 would be fine,
It's-
8:50's.
It's the back end. Anyone come volunteer in our school, if you don't have experience with younger kids, come volunteer 1 o'clock and on, and you will
mean, we
experience.
And we're saying at some point, maybe in a couple of years, we would go to that 2-tier system now and then flip the younger kids first and the high school and middle school kids second. We get a lot of community feedback from parents of the younger kids that would be devastating to their childcare situation because the little kids getting home before the older kids. Their older kids babysit the little kids or childcare, little kids getting home too early. There's no perfect solution except, there's really none.
I'm just
even again, even
advocating
if
for
buses.
kids K-5, and
Yeah.
this is gonna put K-5 in a harder situation.
But you look at what we've done here, the limitations are going to change with time, as we've all pointed out. I have to make a comment on ideal start times. That's perceptual. If you look at start times for elementary schools across our nation, you're going to find that a lot of those times are closer to 9 o'clock. In fact, some of the Western states have mandated a 9 o'clock start.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what you're used to. We all have our opinions on what's best for students, but whether we like to say this or not, we're in our own microcosm here. And the time that we have for Russell Street now, even within Massachusetts, is probably a little earlier than a lot of the districts. So it is just experience and perception.
And I do understand.
feel it. I'm good, thank you.
I do understand there needs to be a shift, but I feel like it's like swapping, and I just want to be an advocate for those kids and those families, because I'm living it
yeah.
182 days. So
Can I say one thing? And I really appreciate you having the courage to be an advocate like this.
I'm very nervous with the outcome.
No, you're doing a great job, and I
Great.
really appreciate it. I will point out though that this model, if my numbers are right, actually moves Shaker Lane's time up. So Russell Street loses preferred spot and it gets pushed back. You've had the best spot for all these years. Now you have maybe a less event, but in terms of I'm just saying that
I know.
I don't want perception to be that we're not caring about pre-K through 5 students when
Just
pre-K through
3-5.
No, not even that, but it's just that it's either no change or an improvement to way using the terms that you're using for the Shaker Lane School. And so Russell Street is the one that appears to be maybe most adversely affected. But Kelly's point is that that's relative to what we've been doing, maybe not relative to national norms. And so I'm not saying this is the perfect solution. I think it's the best of the three, but I completely understand the
Do you
concern.
think it's okay that, just your opinion, you know, everyone's tweaks their own. If Shaker Lane has a problem, which rightfully so, it's a hard schedule, do you think that it's okay to just pass it to the other school? Is that what you're saying? Like.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying
You
it's,
said, because you
no,
haven't had it for a while, so then you should have.
No.
Sorry. I think
Shaker
this
Lane's
is-
changed.
what I'm saying is I don't accept the characterization that we are not, and I just think you're making, I just don't want there to be the characterization that this committee is not paying attention to the needs of pre-K through 5 students. I don't think that's true. And I think this schedule is our best case to attempt to care for all the students, knowing that according to any chart we have, 1/3 of the people will be dissatisfied. We have to make a decision.
I also will, I don't know, Dorothy, if you can pull up the slides, but in slide 23 and 24, if we look at the towns, you're right in that, you know, there's sort of this trade-off when we move to a later time for high school, middle school, that, you know, the lower elementary and upper elementaries end up with sort of this 8:39 time, which for learning, I think from the staff perspective has been definitely expressed as not ideal and wouldn't be an outlier in doing so, although Sudbury is really my hero here, because that seems like the best of all scenarios, and maybe that's something that we move towards eventually. But even in the next slide, there's a lot of elementary schools that do start later and
9, 8,
Right.
between 8:30 and 9, almost all of them.
So by my count, looking at the median of this chart, again, just sort of high school, but looking at the median of the chart, that had Neshoba, lower elementary starts at 8:35. We're proposing starting at 8:45. Upper elementary starts at 8:35. We're proposing starting 15 minutes later. And then they 7:40 and 7:40 are proposing 15 minutes on the other side. So we're within the realm of the median of all of our peers. I'm not sure any one of those is the exact right one, except for maybe Sudbury. But I'm comfortable with what we're proposing here, what we're considering here is within the mainstream of educational practice among our peers.
definitely saying we're not saying that this is ideal for all 4 schools and that there are then challenges.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
All right,
Could I just say one thing?
You may.
I think that everyone said it already, but you guys did a really good job making the slideshow and doing all the research. And I think that's why the data and everything is really concise, the way that I see it at least. I think that there is a clear one that is one. And I think that everyone's opinions are really valid. But I think that at some point we will have to make this change. I mean, even if you just look at it from the athletic perspective, that's one that applies to me a lot. And a lot of people I'm around. If every school around us does eventually shift, which it looks like will happen someday, then we will not be able to compete because
Right.
we'll be sitting around for hours waiting for all the other schools to get out. So I think that, you know, we should try and keep up with the times and we don't want to fall behind. And I think that the data is also really obvious. So thank you.
Thank you for referencing that, John. All right, at this point in time, why don't we close discussion and see if there's an appetite for a vote tonight?
I'd like to vote.
Go right ahead, make a motion.
I would like to make a motion to vote on whether or not to change the school start times, and if so, which option to take.
Why don't you form your motion in forms of supporting one of them?
Oh, I would like to make a motion to vote to change our school start times to a 2-tier system. System that, or the schedule that was outlined on the second community survey.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Motion's made and seconded. I think we would offer any sort of discussion, but we've had discussion at this point in time, but does anyone wish to discuss the particular motion?
If we could just insert option 2 in the motion.
Sure.
Can you just clarify, so if we're voting for a two-tier, then it's option two,
It's
so these
option-
would be the times that we're voting for, not just, we're gonna do a
Right.
two-tier and then
Let's
figure
vote
out
for
what
option
tier
two.
looks like.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
And we can also make it clear that these times are subject to the transportation and
Of course.
not definitive.
Yeah.
We have
Okay.
budgetary and logistical issues of
Okay.
finding the money and finding the buses
Right.
and bus drivers.
Well, and the exact time will be determined based
Correct.
on that.
Yeah.
And so clarify then, so the motion, the vote is, it's our intent to have this system,
Mhm.
provided we can budget it and negotiate it.
Correct.
Yeah. Let's
So this-
negotiate and source the buses.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a lot of
So
contingencies.
three areas, that's right.
Yeah.
Could we review that motion?
Sure.
I don't know how to phrase it more concisely than I did, sorry.
Thank you.
The school committee supports the implementation of option two, the two-tiered system, with the understanding that there are three factors that need to be considered moving forward: securing funds, securing sufficient buses, and finalization of school start times, depending on those two factors.
I'm not sure the superintendent can make that motion.
No, I can't.
So,
You have to make that.
I'll try again.
Well, let me ask one other question then. Is this, you're saying these criteria or these funding, buses, and kind of finalization, is it also depend on negotiation with the LEA?
Yeah, we
or is
should,
that-
we should.
or
put that in
negotiate,
there
okay.
As well.
So the motion, can I try?
Yes, please.
So why don't we just, we'll formally cancel the motion that was previously offered. We'll start from scratch. All right, go ahead, Brad.
I move that the school committee expresses its support for a two-tiered system, option two in the survey, for our schools. We recognizing that the implementation of this plan will depend on funding, busing, and negotiated settlement.
Motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right, motion made by Mr. Austin, seconded by Ms. Gold. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote. Doesn't have to be in person. It doesn't have to.
But it's in person. yeah.
No, I mean,
No roll call.
so used to doing that. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Hearing none, we'll mark that as unanimous. All right, so
Thank
we
you.
moved forward with that. All right, nice work, everybody.
Yes. Thank you, Jen. Outstanding job.
Unfortunately, I think there's more work to be done
Yes.
on that topic, but
Big hurdle, very big hurdle.
over a big one there. All right, third presentation here is a financial update was supposed to be given by Steve Marks. The slides in the presentation, it looks like Kelly might give us an update.
Yes, I don't know if Steve is still.
Oh, Steve. Not.
I'm here.
Steve?
Good evening, everyone. So the reports in your packet. So again, this is our normal bi-monthly budget report that we've been giving. Just to point out a couple of key points here. We are 5 months into the fiscal year, or 40% into the fiscal year. We are 3 months into the academic year, which is about 30%. So you can see we have we've used 27% of the budget. So we're pretty much on track. The one outlier will be the special education line. That's the second line down. You can see that we've only expended 18% of the budget. Again, to remind the committee and the listeners, that the reason that line item is low, and one of the key drivers in that cost center is our out-of-district tuitions. And so if you remember, we get circuit breaker funds reimbursement for those. And so we spend all of that circuit breaker reimbursement that we received last year. We spend that this year. So we spend all of that first before we start spending into this appropriated fund. And that's why that line item is at 18% and not at, like 25 or 30%. Like the other departments. So I just wanted to point, those key factors out. Our utilities, well, again, and I mentioned this before, so we're watching our utility lines. not so much because our usage is up. Our usage is up a little bit because we do allow and we've encouraged teachers to open windows for fresh air, and we're turning over the air more for health concerns. But really, the increase in the utilities cost is more, as everybody's seen at home, their rate increases. So we've had 20 and 25% rate increases for natural gas and electricity, and that's what's driving that line. So we're keeping an eye on those as well. So nothing really concerned in this report, really. So we're on track, and we'll continue to look for efficiencies within the budget. I'd like to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Steve. No questions for me. Anybody else?
No.
Thanks, Steve. Perfect.
Thank you.
Perfectly done, Steve. All right, we'll now hear, well, technically it's on the agenda. We'll pause for a brief opportunity for interested citizens. Showing no hands.
No hands, no questions.
All right, perfect. We'll move through subcommittee reports and then we'll look to adjourn. So PMBC. Anything to
No, we
report?
haven't had anything. So
Okay.
holiday.
Perfect. Budget subcommittee, Steve just gave a financial update. I'd reached out to Steve earlier. We're generally looking to schedule a budget subcommittee meeting just before the end of the year. And we're gonna take a look at, we're gonna use that meeting to take a look at the special ed budget and make sure that CPAC's in attendance. And then we also have a meeting with the select board on Monday, and the FinCom. It's a joint meeting, which we've all been asked to attend. I believe everyone can make it in person with the exception of Brad because he has a commitment. But if we can make it, it would be great for us to be there.
That's Thursday.
It's this Monday, and we're scheduled for 7:25, and it's in the first floor of the library. Okay,
Back, right?
and it's, yeah, it's
Right.
yeah, go down this,
In the start.
the starts room. Yeah, when you show up at 7:25, that's the only thing going on in the building. You just gotta go down the stairs. So yeah, you know, we're projected to ask for more than they had potentially budgeted for, and then the town, being the other half of the budget, is kind of doing the same thing. So it's a meeting of the minds to say, how are we gonna figure this out? So that's coming up on Monday. Shaker Lane Building Report. Anything in
We have-
particular?
No, we have a meeting this coming Thursday, I believe, right, with MSBA.
Right, to look at enrollment projections.
Yeah.
So,
Of note, I was invited to that, but I have a work conflict, I think, so
it's okay.
I won't be there.
We'll update you.
Thank you very
What
much.
happens.
Policy Subcommittee report.
Just that we're planning to start meeting again now that Beagle has some free time to give to us. We've got some policies need to review. We need to get back on schedule. We will create with Dorothy a schedule of policies and review. We can share with that committee and with interested people to know what we'll be looking at moving forward. Will be a lot of, we'll take up more of the agenda in the meetings and starting January.
And to maybe add to that a little bit, we're starting the TFN review on homeless veterans services for children, et cetera. I'm going to be sending you 3 policies next week that need to be implemented within the district. Short policies. I'll send them out Monday, and if you'd like to meet virtually or have any questions, you can reach out to me, and hopefully we can put it on December 15th meeting for.
Yeah, let's plan on having the first reading then, or
Or-
find a time to talk. Yeah. Well, so we'll deal with those as an almost emergency basis, then get a policy review schedule, more formal look, more structured look through our policies after that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, that wraps up subcommittee reports. And as noted, our next meeting is December 15th, 7 p.m. Same location. Look forward to seeing everyone. There's no further business. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Adjourn.
Second.
By Mr. Austin, seconded by Ms. Cole. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We're out. Good evening.